Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another exciting episode of the Vinnie Eastwood Show, broadcasting from the wonderful, least corrupt country in the world, allegedly, New Zealand, the shining jewel of the South Pacific, where all race relations are born, and everybody gets along just dandy and swimmingly. My very special guests today are going to be forming a different format to the way the Vinnie Eastwood Show normally runs. It'll be pretty similar, but a little bit different. Is that we've got two people of opposing viewpoints on together. Normally I just have somebody on, they get to talk about whatever they want, and I act like their best friend. I'll still act like their best friend anyway, except they might not get along. So let's see how it happens. What have we got? Is it the red corner or the blue corner kind of thing? So in the blue corner we have John Ansell wearing the white trunks. And in the red corner for the mana party, we have Joe Trinder in the black undies. Welcome to the show, bro. And boys.
Hey, hi.
Okay.
Kia ora, Vinny.
So, this has come off the back of a recent interview on Māori television that many who have seen it have called shameful from both sides of the debate. More to the point. And I would like to offer this platform as, shall we say, a supplementary, somewhere you can actually have a real debate without being shouted over or shouted down, as I often see happen to people who are trying to explain their ideas, especially if those ideas are somewhat offensive. So, John, can you please explain to us from your experience how that interview on Māori television went, perhaps what went right and what went wrong?
Well, it went the normal way that interviews on Māori television go for me. I'm normally told there'll be one person up against me, and normally there's more on the day, and then the interviewer climbs into me. Or this time it happened anyway. Last time it didn't. But it's quite good for me. I quite like the ambushes because it serves to show the moderate Maori people how one-eyed their radical cousins are. And in this case, we had a woman, Mihi Ngaiarangi Forbes, who I presented evidence to that Alan Titford did not burn down his house. It's one of the offences that he's serving 24 years in prison for. On receipt of that evidence, her first priority was not to think, hey, a major injustice has been done. It was to demand that I apologise to the tribe, Te Roroa, who were plausible suspects, but evidently, with this evidence, if you accept this evidence that Titford's wife's father burnt the house down to get her off the farm where they were being menaced with death threats and stock shootings and all this by the local tribe. If you accept that evidence, that means that Te Roroa is off the hook as well. Her main priority was that I apologise to Te Roroa, not that, maybe the state might like to apologise to Titford. So it's absolute shameful bias, and there was much yelling and screaming and so on, but basically, I think I put across most of the things I wanted to say. I didn't do it completely because I was being yelled at the whole time, but it was just another example of bias from a racist station who like to call me racist.
And Joe, what are your thoughts on
proclaiming racial equality?
What are your thoughts on the interview and how it was conducted, the good and the bad sides of it?
I think Mihi Forbes could have conducted that interview a bit better. But as with most people that interview John, I think they just get really frustrated by some of the things that he says, that they get a bit, they tend to talk over the top of him and get frustrated, yeah.
Well, in that case, what happens in those kind of conversations, I used to do that to people when I'd shout out. It's either because I know I'm right or because I'm too afraid that they are.
Yeah. Could I come in here? Or
go for your life, son.
I think that the real reason people get frustrated with me is that I'm incredibly blunt in telling the truth. It's not very welcome in this country. I said at one point, when I get really sick of this idea that Maori are somehow disadvantaged by colonisation, when all the facts and figures show that they've been massively advantaged over where they were. And for my sins, I just come out with it, and I said, look, because Mihi said, oh, but what about our bad crime stats? And I sort of pointed out, you could barely hear me for all the yelling, but Maori were the most violent race on earth before the British set eyes on them. I mean, that much is absolutely clear. It doesn't give me a great thrill saying it. All of our cultures on earth, including mine, certainly had their moments of barbarity and depravity. But, to say that Maori violence today is caused by the British, when it's only 4 generations since they were living in cannibalism, the part descendants, that needs to be said. Sooner or later, that needs to be said, and I'm just saying it, and that's the thing that frustrates people, because it's true. A Maori woman, a cousin of Hone Harawira's told me that. She said, oh, but I can say that, but you can't. I said, well, I can, because someone has to point out the obvious truth of where this violence comes from. It doesn't come from the British.
Joe, your response?
Well, I do tend to disagree with that. One of the things that John always likes to point out is he goes straight for the throat when he's discriminating against Māoridom, is he goes straight for cannibalism. Well, there's been strong history of cannibalism actually in British history, and examples of that is one of the members of the royal family, King Charles, was actually a cannibal. He used to eat blood, and also during the Crusades, many Europeans resorted to British precisely, resorted to cannibalism when they were invading some of the Middle East. And there's also been examples in World War II on the Eastern Front where the only food that was around was human flesh, and people were committing cannibalism in Europe as short as 50 years ago. But one of the things I think is quite funny about the cannibalism is Māori stopped probably cannibalism about 100 years. In Europe, they still do cannibalism in the 21st century. There's still people getting convicted for cannibalism. So we've given up. I mean,
well done. But, this was endemic. I mean, all Annex Sykes could say about that was, there were the French cannibals, whoever they were. I mean, I know the French like a good feed, and I know that humans taste good, apparently. But, I'm talking about endemic cannibalism. It's not because, I don't bring this up because it's fun. Paul Moon wrote a huge book about it. It's just the truth. There was cannibalism, there was slavery. The British, the supposedly evil British, put a stop to all of that. I reckon deserve a little bit of gratitude instead of this endless moaning that we get. If the British were cannibals, why aren't we doing it now? Why aren't we violent now as Maori are? That's the point I'm making. It's because it's been accused, we've been accused of causing Maori violence somehow because of colonisation. That's the only reason I talk about it. It's just absurd.
So can I see if I've got it right here? Were Māori actually engaging in cannibalism before the British came here? Yes, we know that's a historical fact. Was it widely used, or was it only the top of the class elite Māori chiefs doing it? No, it wasn't. At the time, I think what's happening now is completely different to what happened at the time in terms of cannibalism. After all, there have in fact been so-called vampire cults exposed even in Hollywood, where stars and things of that nature will go in and drink human blood. This happens at the highest echelons, so both of you are correct. However, the point of bringing cannibalism into it, although it's true, I'm not 100% sure if it relates specifically to Māori violence rates in the developed world.
It's just part of a culture of violence that we see, and I'm just saying, wouldn't it be smarter of Māori to go forward rather than look backwards? so much of Maori culture is to do with celebrating violence in some form or other. And I'm just saying that's not hell of a useful these days. Surely, I mean, you've got Maori people who are, heavily not Maori, heavily from, interbred with Europeans, yet persist or seem to enjoy this looking back to the sort of cannibal days, the kamates and all that. But it's not that. It doesn't really. I don't care what people do in their own, cultural groups. I just care when they start to blame mine for their own problems, their own poor choices, which manifestly is the case these days with a minority of Maori. My grievance is with the grievers, I suppose. I have good relations with many Maori here in the town where I live, and they support me. So this is not a Maori versus Pākehā debate. This is a Maori separatists and European sympathisers versus 80% of the population, including quite a lot of Maori. That's how I wish to characterise the debate, because that's true. I'll put up a slide if you like. I don't know if this can be, how well this can be seen. You'll tell me. But it says...
You might want to pull it back a little.
Pull it back a little. I mean, I get asked how many people I speak for. I mean, I don't speak for anyone but me, but how many people share my views. These are 9 different polls to do with, whether we want Maori privilege,
Hold it up a little.
Seats at the council table, whether Maori are special. That was a close-up poll. And the number is always 80%, give or take. The top one is 85. That was whether they want Maori housing in the Bay of Plenty. But there's a real consistency there. It's 80% more or less of New Zealanders don't want a bar of this stuff. And only a few mugs like me are prepared to get up and say that.
Can I make a point here? How long, you used to be an ad man, right, John?
Yeah.
When did the PC gone mad saying start to come about, and how long has it been instituted, and now you're trying to talk about something that's certainly not PC, and I think, in theory, the idea behind political correctness is to prevent people saying what they really think.
Well, I'll speak up for political correctness a little bit. I mean, it did start with the German communists. But what people really mean about PC, and my great crime, I guess, is being unkind, being mean. What PC has taken to mean is, be kind, be nice. Niceism, I call it. But, I maintain that we have racism in this country. It's not the kind that Joe thinks we have. I think it's coming from the Maori side. And before we can defeat racism, we have to defeat niceism. The niceism that New Zealanders are nice. We're nice people. I maintain we'd rather sell our country down the river to Maori separatists than be called a nasty name, racist. Now, I don't buy it, and I do stand up and say what I think. I don't enjoy it, but from my time in advertising, I know that you have to jolt. To make any kind of change, you have to jolt. The lefties know this. I mean, they go marching down the street and they hijack oil rigs and they do what has to be done to jolt. So I use language to jolt. I will say, Maori have come, from the Stone Age to the Space Age in 150 years and haven't said thanks, because I was particularly upset one day.
I'd like to hear from...
but it's not very nice, but
I'd like to hear from Joe in a minute, but what you just said, John, reminded me of a comedy sketch by the Māori comedian Pio, who was driving a taxi along with a Pacific Islander taxi driver, and the Pacific Islander was criticising him, and he said, "You crazy Māoris, you were sailing across the sea in these leaky waka. We just waited for the Pālangi to build the 747s." Joe?
Okay, well... Going into what John's banner, where he's shown that the majority of the people are disagree with some of the aspirations of Māori people. What John's doing is he's pretending that there is a something out there called reverse racism. And actually, reverse racism doesn't exist. It's imaginary. What it is, it's when governments go and help minorities who are struggling. Now, this is normal for governments to go out and help people who are impoverished, who aren't doing as well as other members of the mainstream society. And what he's pretending is that anything given to Māori is an attack on mainstream Pākehā, which it is not. What it is helping poor, impoverished Māori who are trying to make it in society. So when John says that that colonisation has brought Māori from the Stone Age to the Space Age, well, I like to compare that to the Polynesian race. They managed to colonise an area the size of Russia before anyone had even left the British Isles. They had managed to colonise multiple islands. They had star navigation and celestial navigation down to a T. Sure, they didn't have the wheel, but they probably didn't need it because they had sailing craft that could get around the planet. They've gone from Taiwan down to South America, and they've got chicken bones that they've DNA analysed to find out that Polynesians had actually been down there. And there's also evidence off the coast of California that in Los Angeles that they've also travelled there as well. And the primary evidence of that here in New Zealand is the kumara, or the sweet potato. And you can find that actually originated from South America. So as far as us coming from the Stone Age, I find that hypocritical. I think that it's ridiculous. Māori and Polynesian are some of the most advanced races on Earth. We have contributed to the human race just as much as any other people on this planet. Over to you, John.
Could I actually put something in here? Because sea anchors that are of Chinese origin, that are thousands upon thousands of years old, have been discovered off the California coastline. A Stone Age monument has been discovered in Vermont in the United States. There are mountains of evidence from all around the globe that there used to be one big global seafaring society with all these different races, and there were established trade routes and things of that nature. So Polynesians are nothing special. In my opinion, there's actually only one race. It's called the human race, and we're all brothers, right?
I agree.
And every brother has stoushes with his siblings and what have you. But what's lacking here, and I think where the debate needs to be facilitated, is to come to perhaps an understanding of what each other's coming from. Because when you're talking about things that are perhaps, let's say, Mark Twain's quote was, "It's far easier to convince somebody that they've it's much easier to convince somebody to believe a lie than it is to convince them that they've been fooled," if you know what I mean. And when we're talking about this kind of thing in New Zealand, I don't think our full history has been completely honest. In fact, I doubt any country anywhere has its full history told to it and is accessible to the general population. So when people have arguments, let's say on a radio show or a television show, about things in a historical context, they're talking to people who have no knowledge of this whatsoever. So because they don't have anything to back up or disprove what's going on, basically they just throw it out the window and say, "I just don't know what's the truth." And that's the real difficult thing here, and that's what I seek to facilitate here, finding out exactly what the truth is.
May I comment on what Joe said? Because I know that people will think that I am saying my race is better than your race. Look at my people are better than... I don't say, and have never said, that Maori are in any way inferior in genetically or otherwise. Maori were in the Pacific. There was no copper, there was no tin, so you weren't going to have a Bronze Age. The vast majority of humanity was clustered in Eurasia, so naturally, their geniuses were able to compare notes, and naturally the desperation in which they lived, the climatic desperation, required the Eurasians to, think pretty laterally. In the Pacific, things were better. There was a ready supply of food. So, the Polynesians did what they had to do do well in their environment. I'm just saying that the fact of the matter is, for all those reasons, the British were a more advanced race when they got here in terms of their technology and so on. It's like if a spaceship landed today, the world would have changed. A spaceship from Venus lands, the world just changed, didn't it? There are various things we can do about it. We can say, well, let's kill them because they're foreign and they could kill us. Then one of us says, actually, that might not be a good idea because they've got tractor beams. And another one of us says, well, I've actually been to Venus and it's not too bad there. And these guys actually want to do a treaty with us and they seem to want to treat us reasonably well. They want to run things because that's what they do in the universe. And if you think they're bad, you want to see the Martians. So that was the sort of equivalent when Cook's ship hove to in the bay. The world had changed and the Maori people, or the Hobson ship, if you like, the Maori people at the time, the leaders, had to make a decision. They decided, on balance, it was best to deal with these guys, and the legacy of that decision is here today. They're thriving. They're living twice as long. They've got all this new technology. They were smart enough, those chiefs. See, when they went from the Stone Age to the Space Age, I'm saying that was a pretty smart decision. The British offered them a way to leap forward 3,000 years technologically. Now, that was a pretty smart thing to do. They could have they had 100 or 70-odd thousand of them. They could have killed all the Brits that came in. The Brits would have got uppity and probably brought a gunship in. Although they weren't of that mood. The English were wet liberals by that stage. They were going to go away if the Maori didn't want to do the treaty. So I think, it's not about, one group of people is better than the other. I actually have a much more positive view of Maori than many of these Maori leaders, I think. Left to their own devices, in the modern world, they do very well. When they're patronised and made to feel inferior by their own people, not surprisingly, they think, oh, well, we're not thought highly of, so we'll just, we'd better behave like dummies then.
Might I interject?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I think when you were on the panel with Willie and JT, I tried to call in, but the show ended before they could get to my call, unfortunately. The question I wanted to ask was, from treaty settlements and things of this nature, what percentage of it filters down to the poorest Maori who are actually affected the most by poverty? Joe, do you know? Because I don't know.
No, I don't have any statistics on the internal goings-on and iwi Trust. But I'd also like to address the analogy of what John mentioned with a spaceship turning up. There's more to the spaceship turning up than it just being better technology. What you're looking at is a spaceship turning up to this planet of superior technology. And what they do is they're going to ban your religion. They'll set up their own religion, like the Tuanga Suppression Act. They will ban your sports. They will ban your language. And then what they'll do is they'll confiscate your land. And then what will happen is 55% of your race will die out in their colonisation, as did the Māori race, who at the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi went from 100,000 to 47,000 people. So these alien species turning up in superior vessels, colonization's not this lovely, overwhelmingly positive experience that John portrays. It's actually devastating.
Well,
yeah, over to you, John.
I think I'd better come in because I'll just forget all of the things that you've said. Ban the religion. Well, they overwhelmingly endorsed the Martians' religion, or the Venusians' religion, if you like, the British religion. Said thanks, had the good grace in the Kohimarama conference of 1860. Some of the chiefs that had signed the treaty, like Tamati Wakanani, were there, and others, had the good grace to thank the governor, 200 chiefs, the biggest gathering ever, I think, at that point, to thank the British for the glories of Christianity. I'm not a Christian, I don't like religions, but you have to acknowledge that Christianity was what saved Maori from cannibalism. They talked them out of it, the missionaries. Banning the sports, well, I don't know, Maori seem pretty good at sport to me. The deaths, now, yes, there were deaths because there were diseases to which Maori were not immune, and I think everybody regrets that. And that would happen in an intergalactic colonisation too, I suppose. By far the greatest cause of Maori depopulation in the 19th century, however, as proved by John Robinson, were the wars in the first half of the 19th century. There were no breeding. The numbers went from about 120,000 to 70,000, provably. And there was a serious shortage of male breeding stock. That, coupled with the practice of female infanticide, which was not just a Maori thing, but is true of, desperate peoples all over the world. The girl is somehow not an economic unit, so they were killed at birth. So that was the major cause. There was, it comes down to information, though. I mean, Joe wants to believe that there was a major cause. The major cause was the diseases. I suppose, am happy to believe when I see evidence that it was mainly the wars and the female infanticide. We're both biased, but the numbers built up again in the later part of the 19th century, and they're absolutely booming today. But yes, there was a hiccup. The diseases were definitely a problem. I don't think the Maori who are there today would say that they would like to go back to the way things were in 1840 before the diseases, but before all of the other things, including medicines, life-preserving medicines, technology, and so forth. And British law, British institutions. Apirana Ngata put it really well in his book about the Treaty of Waitangi, which is so desperately inconvenient to my opponents, because I agree, he agrees with me, that as you sleep, he told the old lady that he'd written the book for, as we sleep, there are 100 laws keeping us safe. Now, that's mind-blowing when I think about it. It's true. If I want to kill you, Vinny, I have to think twice, because there's all these things that will happen to me, which didn't happen before. Maori law was basically might is right. They were basically like sparrows at a bird bath, wondering who was going to come and knock them on the head next, or who they were going to knock on the head. British law brought that security, property rights, and security. So I don't know if I've covered the list, Joe, but there is another side to that story.
However, John, you've kind of failed to address some of the points that Joe raised, like, for example, the suppression of the Taonga Act, and also the banning of Māori language in schools and things of that nature.
Let me do that. I'm not an expert on the Taonga Suppression Act. I think it was 1908. I presume they had their reasons. Presumably, people must have been dying from dubious, equivalent today would be, homeopathy for cancer or something. I don't know. I won't pretend to understand that. I do have some enlightenment about the teachers in schools, the language. The Maori chiefs themselves insisted to the Ministry of Education that their children should not be taught in Maori-only schools. They should be taught English. Now, this is what is conveniently left out when Maori people say that, oh, my grandmother was beaten. Well, I'll tell you what, at a boarding school in 1970, we were beaten as well. Physical punishment was right through the system in those days and ended relatively recently. But if they weren't allowed to speak Maori, that was at least in part because the chiefs saw that English was the way of the future, a bit like Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore deciding that English would be the language of Singapore. Wouldn't have gone down that well, but by God, it's improved Singapore's prospects.
Joe, your response?
Well, I'd like to address some of those points that John detailed out. And the New Zealand Musket Wars, as John mentioned, which is prior to the New Zealand Wars, he said that many Māori died probably in the range of 100,000. Well, one thing, and also his buddy Don Brash mentioned this in the Orewa hate speech. One of the things that really astounds me with this with these numbers that they've managed to pull out of thin air is how do they know this? Because there were no births, deaths, and records. No one was calculating how many people were in each iwi in New Zealand. There was no records of birth, deaths, or records of Māori. So you couldn't calculate how many people were dying in these. And I think what they've managed to miss is that when Māori went to war, it wasn't to go and exterminate each other. They did it for this thing called mana. And what they were trying to do was achieve mana. It wasn't to go out and exterminate one another as the history that John's portraying. But also another topic that John brought up was diseases with when British colonists came over with diseases. Well, actually, a lot of the British colonists were really badly disease-ridden, and what had happened is they'd spent a year on these sailing vessels coming out to New Zealand to colonise it, and the diseases had spread through the ship. So, for example, in Otago Harbour, there's Quarantine Island where they used to keep all of the new colonists until some of them killed off with disease. So what Māori were excluded from was public health to the 1930s. So it's acceptable that colonists turn up here with diseases, but you do not exclude the indigenous people from public health when they are also suffering from diseases you've introduced. It's absolutely unfair.
Now, at the same time, Joe, as you're saying, there's no birth and death records and whatnot. Are you also saying that there was a huge amount of Māori who got killed at the same time as not having any records yourself? Or is this just the different part of the century we're talking?
Well, they'd done some counting of the Māori race in the 1800s. But prior to the Treaty of Waitangi, there was no... the last count, I believe, was probably Cook. And he maybe put the race at maybe 25,000. But, I mean, that's just...
100,000, I think.
Oh, yeah, you're probably right.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure Maori can count. You know, much is made, especially in the Waitangi Tribunal, of the power of Maori oral history. So if we're now saying that they couldn't count how many they had, I mean, this information was gained from various iwi. John Robinson, when he was a scientist, Harvard, I think he was, or MIT, he was hired by the Waitangi Treaty of Waitangi Research Unit at Victoria University. He subsequently exposed their bias and their requirement that he alter his findings because they weren't to their taste, so he's unpopular. Had put out a book called The Corruption of New Zealand Democracy by pointing that out. But his way of calculating was to take the first known census, the first reliable census, 1858 I think it was, and work back in terms of likely birth rates and death rates. And by that method he got from whatever the population figure was in 1858 back to a plausible estimate of what the population was in 1840, which I think he said was 70,000. As to where he got the figures for how many had died, I mean, it doesn't matter anyway now. It doesn't matter, but certainly there were over 1,000 wars. I mean, of one kind or another. They were constantly at war because there was no property rights. There was no security. The British brought that. What I'd like to jump forward and say is that regardless of all this and who was right and who was eating who and so on, what child today who is Maori or part Maori is disadvantaged by, say, the education system? I mean, Charles Bennett had was honest enough to say that if there's any bias, it's pro-Maori. That was when he was alive, which was a while ago. You know, Maori get every advantage, scholarships and so on, people bending over backwards to help them in all ways in society. What Maori child... I said this to a guy called Carwyn Jones, who I accused. He said, you've called me a sort of pretend Maori. I said, no, I didn't, Carwyn. I called you a make-believe Maori. He says, well, yeah, exactly. What do you mean? I said, well, you're Welsh. You got red hair and white skin, and your name's Carwyn Jones. And I said, what reason do you have for your children getting money from my children? He said, oh, well, my great-grandmother was prevented from speaking Maori in school. I said, well, there you go. See, my wife comes from Taiwan. She's one of those immigrants that Te Ururoa Flavel thinks shouldn't be helped at the expense of Maori. And, guess what? Her son wasn't allowed to speak Chinese in school. I don't think he tried, but, it wasn't encouraged. She taught it to him at home. And I said, what is stopping your grandmother from, what was stopping her from making sure that her children spoke Maori at home? So he wasn't terribly convincing. He went off in a huff. But I do want to know why my children should be paying money. When it comes down to it, it is all about money, not mana. It's about money. There's no mana in taking other people's money.
And considering I
couldn't get an answer.
And considering it was the chiefs themselves who told the ban on speaking Māori in school because they wanted to be taught in English, that kind of makes it not make sense anymore.
Well, those chiefs were very sensible. I think Māori today should give thanks to their people. I don't criticise them. Those same chiefs were into cannibalism and all that stuff. But then so were our lot, if you go back far enough. Those chiefs realised that they had been living a sort of counterproductive lifestyle, and they sought to change. They thought there was much debate at Waitangi. You'll see the speeches left, right and centre. They were clearly of the understanding they were surrendering sovereignty, because some of the chiefs absolutely vociferously said, I don't want to be down, down, down while the governor is up, up, up. Go home, go home. In the end, they signed. And in the end, by majority, those chiefs made a great decision for their people, just as we would if the Venusians came and we decided on balance, with all the risks of what these guys might do if they don't turn out to be as friendly as we think. With all that, those risks paid off. We took the decision and the risks paid off, and Maori are doing very well today. Not as well, if you like, because it hasn't been a few generations, not as well as the people who had the advantage of being technologically, more advanced, but very well compared with other, native people and with where they used to be. And we're all doing much better than we used to then. I agree with you, Vinny. It is about, the superior race that I'm in favour of is the human race. We're a wonderful species, how we solve our problems. There's not much between us all, and we'll certainly band together when the Venusians really do come, or the Martians. We'll suddenly realise all these differences that we squabble about are not really at all significant. That's all I want, is racial equality, and for that I'm often called a racist.
Well, can I ask, what's the definition of racism? Is it discriminating against a race, or is it being in favour of a race?
It's both. I deplore apartheid in South Africa. John Minto of the Mana Party was very, very strong, a very strong New Zealander in those days. He has gone quiet when it comes to the black majority rule in Zimbabwe and places like that. I think you've got to be consistent. If you deplore apartheid in South Africa, you've also got to deplore it when it starts showing itself in New Zealand and other places, albeit not as extremely. But when you've got people like Te Ururoa Flavel saying that Maori are superior or should get more, that is the same thing. It's on a different part of the continuum, but it's the same thing. And it's my mission to show that Joe's side of the argument is actually where the racism is, and I think that's legitimate.
Joe, can I ask you, previous to after British colonisation, the treaty and all of this kind of thing, I was thinking about tribes and communities, how they worked and how they maintained their sense of unity together, and whether or not that's eroded over time. And as a result of no longer having community and strong family support networks, and this has happened right across society, there's way more divorce now than ever before, way more delinquent children now than ever before. Are Māori a victim of the same kind of phenomenon as everyone else, with the exception that they get racially targeted by the justice system?
So, are you meaning like back historically?
No. You know how, let's say, for example, not even 20, 30 years ago, everybody used to know their neighbours? Nobody knows their neighbours now. And all that whole community, all that extended family living with you and everything like that doesn't exist now. All of those used to be support networks so that people would keep out of trouble and have some kind of culture for themselves. And now what it is, it's television, drugs, cigarettes, everything coming at you. So you don't stand a chance without a proper support network. Anybody's like that.
Well, historically, how Māori lived is they lived in communal parasites. And so the parasites were very communal. They kind of lived in a whānau system, and it was an ideal type of lifestyle. So there was a Governor Fox, who became the Premier of New Zealand, the Prime Minister, and he once says they are beastly cannibals living in hoary cannibalism, and he despised the fact that Māori were a communal people and they weren't capitalist. So that would probably be why they attacked a lot of the parasites. And so Māori got forced off their lands with the New Zealand Settlements Act, and they had to live in more swampish areas. And so the prime land where the parasites were given over to the British colonists when all this territory was confiscated in the Settlements Act. So Māori kind of have struggled being forced off their lands and having to live in these swamp areas, and then having to, into the 20th century, having to come into the cities and also adjust to urban lifestyle. But I noticed John spoke about racism and the definitions of racism, and I'll actually give you the official definition of racism. It is the attitudinal or ideological phenomenon that accepts racial superiority, and when present in those with power, justifies them using that power to discriminate against and deprive others of what is rightfully theirs on the basis of their race. So what that means is the people in New Zealand that have the power is certainly not Māori.
So who's being deprived of their money to pay for Māori scholarships? Is it Māori?
Well, no one's being deprived because they are...
where does the money come from? Where does it come from?
From treaty settlements.
And who pays those?
The Crown.
And who pays their taxes to the Crown?
Māori.
Everybody, doesn't they?
Got him. Look, it's those 80% once again who are being fleeced. Look, you've skipped a whole period of history. Maori always do this. These radical Maori always skip to the confiscations. Confiscations had a cause, Joe. Now here's a guy. His name is Wiramu Tamihana. He was one of the more moderate chiefs. Can you see that?
Give me a second. You got to put that up a little.
A little higher.
A little bit higher more.
I'm reading
and pull it back a little bit.
Pull it back.
Pull it up, way back. Way back and up. There you go. That's about right. I'll read that for you. I shall spare neither unarmed people nor property. Wiramu Tamihana, July 18, 1863, on the Waikato plan to attack Auckland.
He was going to kill every man, woman and child in Auckland. That's what he was planning to do. He was one of the more moderate ones. The Maori were trying to drive the Pākehā into the sea. I don't think they were going to have swimming lessons when they got there. They were going to kill everyone. They'd signed a treaty, and they breached it, as Sir Apirananata very unhelpfully pointed out. Our people rose up. They were naughty. They rose up. They were warned. They were... and now here's another one. Now, about here, this is Governor Grey. Oops.
Down a little. Those who wage war against Her Majesty or remain in arms must take the consequences of their acts.
And I won't put up the other slides. The other ones go, and must understand they will forfeit the right to possession of their lands guaranteed to them by the Treaty of Waitangi. These lands will be occupied by a population capable of protecting for the future the quiet and unoffending from the violence with which they have been threatened. Now, I argue that Governor Grey is New Zealand's Lincoln. Thank God we had Governor Grey, or we wouldn't be here. He was New Zealand's Lincoln. He kept his country together. That's what a governor did in those days. He was a much stronger leader than anyone I can think of since. And he did what he promised. You know, they rose up and he took their lands off them. Now, one can argue about the quantity, and some of them were given back, some of them weren't. You can certainly argue that had the Maori won, they would have confiscated a hell of a lot more than land. They would have confiscated, by their own track record up to that point, the lives of every man, woman and child, and they were claiming to want to do the same. They didn't attack Auckland because Grey stopped them. So I want to inject that into the discussion when we start moaning about confiscations. It must be put in context that the confiscations were done because they waged war on the Crown and lost.
Now, if there is support for Māori out there, my personal belief is in volunteerism. For example, I've filmed a number of and interviewed a number of Māori activists and tried to help them get the word out about their various causes, the struggles of their hapu and so on and so forth. That's how I contribute in my own way to the success of Māori. I don't take from other people and give to anybody else what I'm not willing to give up myself. Is there a disconnect and perhaps a lack of community motivation to help Māori directly, perhaps because they're being forced to do it instead of being asked?
Well, yes, I think that people don't like to be forced, especially on false pretenses when they know that the facts are not being presented properly. I don't think there is any, I don't know any racists. I certainly know I'm not one. The people that are accused of being racist, I think, are well-meaning. People like Martin Dutre lived among Maori, got his information about the Celtic New Zealand, which is a bad choice of word, really, but the pre-Maori people, he got that from the Kaumatua that he lived among. He's a very warm man, and he is well-disposed towards Maori. So am I. I want to see them do well. I just happen to come from that sort of right-wing thing. It's like if it's a difference between a soft mother and a tough dad, if you like. Now, I think you can argue that a strong dad, not a violent one, a strong dad is a pretty good parent when it comes to it. He doesn't choke his kids with sweets, and that's what your sort of right-wing in politics, if you like, is saying. It's still love. It's just a tougher love, and it's saying, look, you don't get anywhere by lying around on welfare. You've got to actually turn up for a job, that sort of thing. That's another kind of love, but it's still love.
One would argue, John, that one needs both a soft mother and a hard father.
Yes.
And at the moment, the government is depriving not just Māori, but everybody of that.
Yeah, I mean, if a kid says, can I have a box of chocolates? The easy thing to do is say, oh, yeah, sure, because you'll love me and you'll think I'm wonderful. You may not in 10 years' time when when your teeth have fallen out. Yeah, there needs to be carrot and stick. There needs to be compassion. And, we live in essentially a socialist society where we're more than anywhere else on earth, probably, people do get money for falling into hard times. It's just a question of degree of money and, how much is enough.
Can I ask? Joe, I think your speakers are up a bit loud there. But feedback. Joe, I was wondering, where does the disconnect happen here? Because I see that there is a racism problem in New Zealand. Anybody who knows New Zealand knows that there is at least a little bit of racism out there. I've got cousins from up north. Bro, trust me, they're racist. And it exists. It's a very real thing. I'm wondering, where's the disconnect? When does it stop being a racial thing, and when does it start being a political ideology thing? Because I noticed that the two people here debating whether or not to socialise help for Māori, one happens to be from a left-wing party, and one has rather right-wing views. Is there a disconnect, or are they one and the same?
Yes, Vinny, there is a disconnect. Part of the reason that stems from the racism of New Zealand is the false histories that are being portrayed by people like Martin Dutry. Now, the foremost expert in the New Zealand wars is James Belich. He wrote the New Zealand Wars. James Belich. Now, as John mentioned, the invasion of Auckland, he denies it. He denies it emphatically. He says that Māori had no intention of invading Auckland because the trade was just too good. They were trading with Auckland City. What the invasion of the Waikato was a defensive war that would be precisely because there were power sites built at Rangariri, and what Governor Grey had done is he marched 2/3 of the British Army down Great South Road to attack the Waikato for land acquisition. Nothing more. It wasn't to help the natives. It was just for greedy land acquisition. Now, I know about John's obsession with Saparana Ngāta, which he's actually taken Saparana Ngāta's life out of context and cherry-picked out bits of his life that are appealing to him. I like to present James Fitzgerald. Now, James Fitzgerald was a Pākehā man, and he was born in the United Kingdom, and I got this information out of the Parliament debates on November 5th of 1863, and this explains in depth that Māori had no idea that they were going to be invaded in the Waikato. I'll read it out. This, sir, is proposed to be done. This great, what I call, this enormous crime is proposed to be perpetrated against a race whom have been refused the right of representation in this house, who at this moment are totally and absolutely in ignorance that we are about to make this great invasion upon their privileges. I'll go forward. I know that it has been, and it has sometimes been said, that the policy which has been advocated by one party in this country has been a policy dictated solely by the desire to acquire lands for the settlers. I object to this upon the grounds that these two grounds. I object first upon the ground that it is contrary to the Treaty of Waitangi, which distinctly guaranteed and pledged the faith of the Crown that the lands of the natives shall not be taken from them except by the ordinary process of the law that is taken within the meaning of the treaty. Lastly, again I object because I conceive the provision to be in direct opposition to the section of Constitution Act which debars us from making any law which is repugnant to the law of England. So what he's done there is he's described that in the first section that Māori have no idea they're about to get invaded. Secondly, what he's also said is that the people who are voting in Governor Grey have voting him for a single purpose is to grab land for themselves. It's land acquisition. It's nothing more. These ideals of Queen and country are just rubbish. It's land acquisition.
Like a corporation financing John Key because they want to acquire power companies or something.
And lastly, the land acquisition was illegal because it was inconsistent with the Constitutions Act. Now, in the Treaty of Waitangi, Māori had been guaranteed they were British subjects under British law, so that in the Constitutions Act of England, the state is not allowed to procure private land. So all of this history that is being told by Martin Dutry and John and the NZCPR and all these other organisations, and that single statement debunks all of that information.
What do you make of this? Is this visible?
Yep, that's visible.
This is the amount of land that was sold willingly by Maori before 1840. The whole South Island and a fair chunk of the north. You know, that's the thing. Of the 25 million acres or whatever it is, acres I think, hectares of New Zealand, about 23 million, was happily sold. You see, Maori were not sheep farmers. They didn't know about making money from trees or sheep. Their surplus land was surplus land. There was just so many trees. They were using a certain part of it, and the rest of it, if they could get a buck for it, which they weren't using, damn right they were going to, and they did in large numbers. Now so you're putting up some guy called Fitzgerald. I'm not, I don't have a view on him. I don't know of him. I'm putting up the greatest Maori statesman of all time. That's why he's so embarrassing. That's the conclusion he came to. You can always find, as you and I are both doing, we can always cherry pick the person that suits us. We can always find someone to back up our claim. One random POM, and you're spoken like a true Brit, which I presume you are, called Joe Trinder. I'm sure you have a lot of my kind of blood there.
I'm actually Irish, John. Yeah.
Irish. Oh, so many.
Yeah.
So the Irish and the Maori have a mutual hatred of the English.
Oh, yes, we do.
They're very, very good at joining forces. And I know a Maori Irish woman. She's fantastic at it. But look, this is what is happening. We're arguing away. We're both doing quite well with our arguments. It all happened a hell of a long time ago.
In fact, that's a good point, John.
So why are we still arguing? Why is one outfit aiming 15% of the population saying that they need to be 50% of the decision making? That's just plainly unfair today. This is the 21st century now. Whatever happened then is arguable from both sides. Now, this is why I'm standing up, I guess, because I just want people to know that there's another side. I win if people know there's another side to what's being said, because it's only one side that's been heard up to now.
If I may, you made the point that we're living in a socialist country now, John, which is basically socialising compensation to Māori, and I get that. It's the whole thing. We've got welfare and all of this sort of stuff. Comes from a very loving place, but in a lot of ways it can in fact be damaging. What I want to know is precisely how you would propose to help Māori if not for the current socialising programs that are being used.
Well, the same way as we help everybody else in our compassionate country. Everybody gets helped. I mean, this is another slide I was going to put up, so now is a good time because it relates to this. I tell the media whenever I get the chance, look, poll the public, especially since I know what the polls are going to say. Should all New Zealanders have the same rights,
obey the same laws, vote on the same roll, help those in need because of their need, not because of their race?
That's the thing. Because of their need, not because of their race. It's very important that we do that. Otherwise, you find that people who happen to have a smidgen of Maori, like some Irishman like Steve O'Regan, for example, who's only a Maori of convenience, get ahead of the queue in the hospitals. That's just not fair. New Zealanders are a fair people. We've got a fair democracy. We do help people in minority positions. Wasn't always so, perhaps, but it's vital that we have equal access to all of our resources, and that's all I'm asking for, really. When you get one person who might have to drop off the list but to make way for some Maori person just because they're Maori, that offends people. It's offensive. That's not going to happen all that often, but that the principle of that is offensive.
Joe?
Well, there's good reason why this is happening, and it comes down to Article 2 of the Treaty of Waitangi, and it says in the Treaty of Waitangi, to the chiefs and tribes of New Zealand and to the respective families and individuals thereof, the full and exclusive and undisturbed possession of their lands and estates, forests and fisheries and other properties. So basically what this means to me, it's everything between heaven and earth, from wind rights, water rights, you name it. That's pretty much what it is. And if it doesn't mean those things, then it's being confiscated. So
can I ask, Joe, just on that point, do British citizens have those same rights or not?
No, it's to the people who signed up to the Treaty of Waitangi, their families.
So the British didn't sign up to the Treaty of Waitangi as well as the Māori, or?
No, it guarantees to the chiefs and tribes of New Zealand and to the respective families. It doesn't. So what goes wrong here is people are misinterpreting the Treaty of Waitangi. They believe that when they get citizenship, so we could have someone jump off the boat from Syria or Iraq or some other exotic place, and the 534 chiefs that signed the Treaty of Waitangi, they just didn't sign it off to anyone who turned up here and got New Zealand citizenship. They made sure that they protected the interests of their families moving forward, and it doesn't matter about their blood quantum, whether they're 1/1000th of a zillionth of Māori. It was that they were respective family members.
Right. Can I leap in here? Complete fabrication, that. You're relying on the so-called official version of the treaty, which bears no relation to the one that I say is the only one that counts, which is the Maori Tiriti. If you want to see what that meant, you look at the Littlewood draft that was found in 1989 and so effectively covered up. And you don't see any mention of forests and fisheries, and you see that it means all the people. It's with all the people of New Zealand. Now, we can argue about that, what that means. Joe will argue that all the people of New Zealand doesn't mean that. It means all the Maori people of New Zealand. Well, I think that's hugely debatable. I think there are certain principles. This gets me back to Belich as well. There are two principles. One is called Occam's razor. I'm not quite sure why. I'm not sure who Occam was or what his razor was about, but it's basically...
He was the inventor of Gillette.
Yeah.
I'm joking, but
if you're stuck for an explanation, you take the simplest one. And there's another principle, a historical principle of historians, that if you're stuck for who to believe, you take the historian that wrote about it closest to the time. So starting with Belich, we are supposed to discard the work of people like James Cowan, whose father fought in the wars, who interviewed a lot of people who were still alive from that time, and we're supposed to defer to the wishes of a lefty called James Belich. I worked for his father, former mayor of Wellington, Labour. Now that doesn't prove anything, it just shows the political agenda. You're supposed to believe people like Dame Claudia Orange, who didn't even mention the Littlewood draft's discovery, despite the fact that she was the first historian to cite it, and she said at that time, oh, this will be tricky politically. But she didn't even mention that in her updated book about the Treaty of Waitangi. Now, to me, that omission says more than all the other words in the book put together about her agenda.
I think it also, John, just remember that you're one of the few people in this country who chooses to talk about these things the way you do, namely because what happens in society when you talk about things that are not comfortable with people, that are offensive, that are in their face, you will draw a lot of heat and flack for it. And if you are employed and you can be fired from your position, that's often a reason why people will choose to omit certain things because they don't want to upset the apple cart. And
you become somewhat unemployable. Believe me, I know. But I just can't remember why I was talking about Occam's razor. The simple explanation about the Littlewood Treaty. Yeah. Right. Look, I have to confess I've just lost... You know what? Actually, right now is the very perfect point to go take a wiki leak and take a break. But, John, quickly finish your point. Well, it's a question of which treaty we are talking about. And there are certain words in the Treaty of Waitangi, whichever version, that give Maori an excuse to inflate. Joe would have us believe that the Maori brought the British in on some sort of management contract to manage the country, which they would continue to own and get all the benefits from. And they'd own everything from the soil to the sky, and the Brits would get nothing, and that would be seen by Queen Victoria as totally proper. That's absolute nonsense. Of course they didn't. And you get that by distorting meanings of words like taonga. You go back to the dictionary current at the time, you find that taonga, as defined by Chief Hongi Hika, no less, meant property procured by the spear. Here it is, the inflation of the word taonga to suit Maori greed over time. It now means treasure and everything we take a shine to. You know, and I've done this one which says, Chief Hongi Hika saying, let us march on the Waitangi Tribunal and spear the 4G spectrum. This is the sort of nonsense. Maori have a wonderful sense of humour. Everybody loves it. and they're using their sense of humour, and they're taking us all for a ride, and it's a big joke, and it's time to stop.
If this debate was a cup of coffee, a kind of coffee bean, it would be a Robusta. We'll be right back after the break. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to The Vinnie Eastwood Show. Check out our sponsors on the homepage, and also bear in mind that this is a listener-supported broadcast that does not survive without your contributions. If you wish for content like this that at least allows people the platform to speak their truth, then please go to thevinnieeastwoodshow.com. That's Vinnie with a Y, because it's the most important question, and Eastwood as in go ahead, make my news. And go ahead, make a donation or start a subscription and a regular gifting today. We'll be right back after the break at thevinnieeastwoodshow.com. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's now hour number 2 of the fastest 2 hours in talk radio. It's the Vinnie Eastwood Show, the lighter side of genocide, because in a world so full of chaos and madness and scumbaggery, if you lose your sense of humour, you will go friggin' nuts. And my very special guests tonight are diametrically opposed, as much in political ideology, historical context, and skin pigment. John Ansell and Joe Trinder. Welcome back, gentlemen.
G'day. I wouldn't mind some of Joe's pigment.
Yeah.
Too white. You can be too white sometimes.
Yeah. Now, speaking of which, we're talking about racism and this debate. And for me, it's starting to look like it's not actually a racial or debate. It's actually more a political/historical debate, much along the lines of the persecution of Holocaust revisionists not too long ago. Would you agree with that, John?
I don't know about your last comment about the Holocaust, but I do think that this is an ideological debate. I think, Maoridom today, not so much a coherent race as an ideology. The Maoridom, the radical Maoridom, is more of an ideology or a religion. The race, I don't know, races are all that relevant anyway. I mean, you get people of different skin colours in different countries. You get, Brits talking with African accents and so on. I mean, culture is a set of habits, and that's what we're talking about. It often coincides with skin pigment, where those people live in those places, but also they move around. I have a Taiwanese stepson who speaks like a Kiwi, and so his race is not as big a part of his identity as the habits that he has formed. Some of those habits are Kiwi now. So I think it comes down to politics. Joe's from the left, I'm from the right. We've got our points of view. And the race thing just sort of dovetails in there, but it's not a necessary part of our makeup, I don't think. It doesn't. But I do think that somebody on my blog said that they visited Dachau. This is some teacher guy who's making a complaint about the program on Native Affairs last week. He's complaining to the Broadcasting Standards Authority, and sort of by the way, he was saying that, why do people stick to these views? Why do the Nazis not plead guilty at Nuremberg when they were obviously guilty? He said, well, he and the prison guard decided that it's because Nazism was such a big part of their identity that to deny it would sort of, their identity would evaporate. Now, I know it's bad taste to bring up that particular analogy. It's just sort of useful, but looking at Annette Sykes, I mean, I think a big part of her identity would evaporate if she was not pushing the Maori barrow. Being Maori to her is a major part of her identity. Being Pākehā or being a British descended New Zealander is not a big part of my makeup. I don't think about it much.
What you're describing, John, is cognitive dissonance. When somebody threatens your worldview, the likelihood is to ignore them and then attack them.
Yeah, well, see, I think that Maoridom have got such pride. The Maori Renaissance has been so successful, but it means that people see themselves, perhaps half of Maoridom, the ones that are on the Maori roll, see themselves as Maori first, second and third, and New Zealand next. Much of the rest of the population don't particularly think about their race. Now, arguably, that's because we're the sort of majority, and we're comfortable with that, and we don't have to think about ourselves in any sort of desperate way. But I just think it's a little bit unhealthy to focus so much of one's identity on that particular aspect and all of the money and grubbing opportunities that go with it, because that's really what I think it's about. Money, not mana. Money before mana. Now, that will be very insulting to Joe, but, being the person I am, I'm putting it up there, that it is about, Maori have got the hang of this British law and they're using it for all it's worth. They're using it to reinvent the treaty and and go for the doctor on the legal front, and the bloody whites are giving it to them, and it's great.
If I might say so, I've spoken to some kaumātua myself, and I asked him. He's no longer with us now, but I asked him if Māori have the equivalent to what Europeans have, an elite that basically govern over our people and fleece us for all we're worth and leave most of us out in the cold. And he said, absolutely.
Well, the chief structure was there, and of course in English society there was the feudal structure of the lord of the manor and so on. Well, I think there's more of a carryover of that in Maori society. I don't know how they enjoy the communistic aspect. There's a tremendous feeling of family among Maori that many of us sort of envy, I think. But when it comes to the power and who controls the land and so on, an individual, capitalistically inclined Maori who just wants to get his share and do something with his land can't do it because that communism is still there. I don't know what... I tried to talk to Ella Henry in the green room the other day about that. She was defending it. If I was a Maori, I'd want my share. I'd want to be able to behave as an individual. But that's what people like me say, isn't it? This collective thing is all very well if you like your relations and the group, but if you're sort of out of whack, well, it could be extremely counterproductive, I would have thought. What do you think, Joe? I mean, this idea of collectively owning land, does that work for you?
Well, I notice that you always talk about the Māori elite, and I'll put it to you that I don't believe that there is a Māori elite. I think that the entrenched treaty hate industry is a gravy train designed by the 1% of the population that control 50% of the New Zealand economy. And what it's designed to do is work as a distraction so that here you have these evil Māori over here who are trying to get treaty settlements, and then you have this other group over here that no one's seen at all that own 50% of the economy, and they're committing tax evasion of $10 billion when treaty settlements are only $1.2 billion drip-fed to 36 different iwi over a period of about 20 years. So an example of that is I can give of that John has been influenced by the 1% that control 50% of the economy is Lewis Crimp. He is definitely one of the 1%ers, and he's funding you, John, and there's no denying about that.
So do you believe, Joe, that there's no Māori 1%? There's nobody in Māoridom that is wealthy and hasn't got Māori's best interest at heart?
Okay, there's 1% of the population of New Zealand that control 50% of the economy, and there's no Māori in that 1%. That certainly ain't Māori. If you really wanted to be of service to your country, John, I would go and look at the 1% of the people that aren't Māori that control 50% of the New Zealand economy. That's where the true tax evasion is going on in this country. They're the real enemy of poverty. They're the parasites of poverty, those people.
Good speech. You didn't answer my question, but never mind. I got to say, this thing about Lewis Crimp, he's a very convenient man to put up. Yes, he gave me some money 2 or 3 years ago. It enabled me to work full-time on this for that period of time, and someone else did as well. And that's what people do in private enterprise. They ask people for money because the state's not going to give it to me when I'm criticising the state. But I'm certainly not, I don't have that money now, and I'm not asking for any more. Now, you were talking about the 1%. Now, people like John Key and that are giving this stuff to Maori. I don't know why you're saying that they're not, but the guys on the left are always at the rich. I mean, the rich are the people that provide all the jobs. You don't seem to see the connection there. But I don't defend the rich when they do badly. I just noticed that the rich do seem to be self-disciplined and live in nice houses, and also extremely generous. You mentioned that man in Southland. Well, he's done a hell of a lot for Invercargill. You go down there and ask what Lewis Crimp's done for Invercargill. I'm not defending him particularly, but he gets a bad press. But he gives an awful lot of his money away, and so he's entitled to. This is just sort of resentment of people with money. People with money equate to people who found a way to do service to people and clip the ticket. You know, people without money generally haven't found a way to be of service to people and haven't clipped the ticket. You know, so let's not have any of that. I'm not even sure where you're going with that, so perhaps I'll stop because I've lost my thread of why you're bringing in the...
Are we able to go back to the Littlewood paper?
Yep.
Go ahead, Joe.
The Littlewood paper. Yep.
Okay, before the break, John was mentioning about the Littlewood paper, and I'll explain what the Littlewood paper is. This is it here. It's a scrap piece of paper that was found in Manurewa in South Auckland in 1989. It mysteriously turned up 1 year before the first treaty settlement. The Littlewood paper is being pushed by a chap called Martin Dutre, who is also running another conspiracy theory about pre-Māori Celtics. So it was found by brother and sister John Littlewood and Beryl Needham, and it was originally designed for Clendon, who was the American consulate, and it was not supposed to end up in South Auckland. It was actually supposed to end up in Washington, D.C. But it's been investigated by the world's foremost expert in treaty historian, and that's Dame Claudia Orange.
Right.
She's travelled the entire world investigating the Treaty of Waitangi. John.
And yet she didn't mention it in her comprehensive book on the treaty. You know, if you were a credible historian and you'd found this document after 149 years that everybody knew had gone missing, even if you thought, it wasn't the document, or you had some political agenda not to want to acknowledge that it was, you would mention it in your comprehensive book about the Treaty of Waitangi, but she didn't mention it at all, even though she was the person that first saw it. And the handwriting, which was transparently, obviously that of James Busby, who everybody knows was the guy who wrote the final draft out, it took them 11 years before Dr. Phil Parkinson, acknowledged by accident in some sort of in-house journal, which Martin Dutre happened to find because he was at National Library at the time, that it was in fact Busby's handwriting. So that's that Occam's razor thing that I was talking about before. The simplest argument is usually the one. Now the simplest thing that it was the Littlewood draft. It was dated the 4th of February, which is the date that everybody knows that the final draft was written. All that people like Dame Claudia and that fellow Loveridge, who was brought in to do the hatchet job on Martin's book, could say was that this seasoned British bureaucrat got the date wrong. Now, you know, the Occam's razor principle is that that's nonsense. The most likely explanation is that he got the date right, and it was the document that we say it is. Over to you, Joe. Have another go.
I want to ask who benefits. I mean, who benefits from the current treaty process as it is, and who loses out? Do you know?
Well, can I respond to
sure, go ahead.
John
sorry.
there? We're hearing from John every day how there's historians, national historians that he dismisses, like Paul Moon, and also Dame Claudia Orange and James Ballich, and also Michael King. And we're hearing that all these professional historians that have dedicated their entire lives to an education in history, and also the professors in universities, that we need to dismiss them. Well,
Well, they just
It astounds me. Why would we go and dismiss the foremost experts in these fields?
The reason why I would, John, if I might ask her, is because historically the foremost experts have been wrong about absolutely everything, from disease to to politics. But yeah.
But Joe, you're making out that this is somehow outrageous that I'm doing it. Those people are the ones who negated the work of the historians that were closest to the action. They said, oh, they can't be right because they're Anglo-centric. In other words, all of their lifetime spent doing diligent work. They had no agendas in those days. There was no treaty scam or industry. They just told it as it was. They are to be dismissed, and we, the new socialist historians, like James Bellich and Dame Claudia Orange and Paul Moon. I mean, Paul Moon said about the Littlewood document, it can't be a treaty because it wasn't signed. You know, what rubbish that is. I mean, we never said it was a treaty. We've always said it was a draft. Of course you don't sign the draft. It was a scrap of paper. You're absolutely right. It was a scrap of paper written after much consideration, after numerous drafts. The final draft was written down in Busby's handwriting on the 4th of February, taken across the bay, where Reverend Henry Williams and his son translated it into Te Tiriti or Waitangi as best they could, and that's the document that was signed. But to put your point of view, you've got to go against these established principles of history writing. The principle of the simplest explanation is the best. You might be right, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, to what you're saying is that the establishment is always right. Why are you a member of Mana?
Well, I'm not saying that the establishment's right. I'm just saying that people wouldn't spend their entire lives at a profession to go and deceive the public on stuff they've worked on and travelled the planet doing and getting paid for as professors. They're not paid for by the New Zealand government to deceive the public. They do this because it's their passion in life. And then to come out with these fantastical theories that someone like Martin Dutre who's got no law degree, just saw a couple of dints and a couple of rocks and thinks that he knows more than professors, it just doesn't seem realistic.
That is an outrageous slur on Martin Dutre. I've come to respect that guy. I am as suspicious of conspiracy theorists as anybody else, so I ask them lots of questions. People like Martin Dutre, Ross Baker, I nibble away at the finer points of the Littlewood document or the Celtic stuff, whatever. They always come back, he in particular, Dutre, always comes back with a cogent answer. He deserves respect, and he deserves to be responded to with more than just character assassination. When people respond with character assassination, that shows me that they are being dishonest and they don't have any answer to the guy's explanations. You know, we went up there with on Mount Albert on my birthday, the 21st of March, autumn equinox this year, and we watched the sun come up in a trench that was cut by the Patuparaiahe, according to Martin, according to the Kamatua who told it to him, right in the slot at Mount Wellington, right when it was supposed to. And he took them up there to do that. He took them all around Auckland to show them these things, and none of it appeared on the program. Why not?
Now, here's the other thing. Do you believe, Joe, considering you were the one who kind of suggested we have this debate, that the mainstream media is covering John and Martin Dutre's points, perhaps in their full detail? Joe?
You, Joe?
Oh, okay. Okay, well, first off, when you look at Martin Dutre's conspiracy theory, and that's all it is. There's no reality in it, because I used to be in the Royal New Zealand Navy. I've done some maritime travel, and the distance from Britain, where he's saying the Celtics come from at the time of Christ, is approximately 24,000 kilometres. To start a civilization in a country, NASA have actually discovered that you need to have a minimum of 15 women on board for genetic variance, or else the people die the civilization will die off if it doesn't have genetic variants. But we live in the 21st century, and we've got a civilization that now has things like aircraft and ships and refrigerators, and we also have a great degree of medical knowledge. So back then, the Celtics were quite a primitive people, and what they didn't understand was there was things like malaria and also other diseases that you get when you go and travel long distances. Scurvy is a prime example. So they'll be reluctant to get out of the Atlantic Ocean and to get into the Pacific Ocean at the time of Christ. So the very first European to reach the Pacific Ocean was Ferdinand Magellan. He's not just challenging Māori history, New Zealand history, he's recreating European history. This is this whole fantastical history that that would change the world.
We mustn't do, must we? We mustn't challenge. We mustn't come up with new theories. Now, you give credence to the Maori, the so-called indigenous Maori, who are really indigenous to the other side of the Pacific and did well to get here. You say that that's okay, but people can't come from further away by the same means for some reason. I don't get into that. The Celtic stuff, I've read it. I've seen some books that are totally implausible. One called From the Ends of the Earth. It's just a ridiculous book. I think Martin would say so as well, purporting that, this is a little speck, as must be New Zealand. It could have been Fiji. It could have been the Philippines. Same pictures repeated again and again and again. Just nuts. So I can make the distinction between that and what Martin has explained to me. I would just like someone to debate him fairly, not with put-downs, and I'll be interested in the result, and I'll be happy to assess it. But he has done an enormous amount of work, and all you want to do is say, "Oh, it can't be real because it would require..."
Because it's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Richard M. Nixon, when he was being exposed by Woodward and Bernstein over the Watergate affair, said, "It's not true, they're just conspiracy theorists." He was later found out to be part of a conspiracy and a crook, which he also denied.
Of something being a conspiracy... I've been to a 9/11 thing, a very plausible-looking thing. I don't know, I'm bewildered. But I certainly know that they put up an awful lot of evidence. And they deserve to be respected, and they deserve to be negated. They deserve to be a two-sided debate on all these things. Not one person just saying, "Oh, it's too fantastic for me, I can't be bothered, I'm not going to listen, so I'll just call it a conspiracy theory," and that'll probably convince a number of people not to bother.
Not to mention, Joe, you made the point earlier that why would somebody spend their entire life devoted to a field of study just to mislead and deceive people? Which is precisely the exact same thing that Martin Dutre has done.
Well, no, it's not.
Well, not his entire life, but...
He doesn't have a history degree. He's
for
never
quite a
been
few
through
years.
a university. He doesn't know how to tell the truth.
How to deceive. The academia has a bloody lot to answer for. I don't think anybody buys the argument just because you've been to university and become a trained parrot that you're somehow more intelligent than somebody else. Plumbers that I associate with are brighter than a hell of a lot of the graduates. The graduates have just submitted themselves to indoctrination. Now that to me is not... I didn't hang around long at university, and I went back to tell them that a few years ago. I don't think just because someone's been to an indoctrination palace like Waikato University that they have any more claim on intelligence than anybody else. Arguably the reverse. People who conduct their own studies, like Martin Dutre have, like I have, I think you can argue that they are probably more independent of mind, more open-minded, than those that submit themselves to indoctrination into how to become a trained parrot, like those who go to New Zealand universities. That's why New Zealand universities' social science degrees are so poorly thought of, the worst in the OECD. It's because of this, this indoctrination program around the treaty as much as anything else.
What's your response to that, Joe?
Well, Martin Dutre is he's an American immigrant here to New Zealand. And I think what his theories are actually based on is Anglo-Saxon racial superiority. And what confounds him is he doesn't accept that Polynesians, who were only probably 2,000 to 3,000 kilometres away, that island hopped from the Cook Islands to the Kermadec to New Zealand and already had a proven knowledge on celestial navigation, and these are technologies that the Celtics didn't have. And what Dutre's not trying to prove, he's not trying to prove that they managed to get the journey here. What direction did they come from? Because if you've ever noticed the Pacific Ocean, it's blocked off by two large continents, North and South America, and also Africa, and also Australia to some degree. So if you spent the 3 years travelling here at 2 to 3 kilometres, don't you think you'd probably want to stop at one of the other large continents that are between here and New Zealand? So I just, there's no other evidence of the travel coming out here. There's no, what you also have to have is what's called, Māori have a Mongoloid bee skull, Celtics had a Caucasoid skull. There'll be some evidence lying around like pre-Tasman Caucasoid skull buried somewhere. So you know, seeing a couple of dints and a couple of rocks, Māori could have done that. They were perfectly capable.
Right. So did Māori use bullons and worship sunrises and dig trenches to measure equinoxes and all of that kind of stuff? Because according to the many of the kaumātua that Dutre has spoken to, that the Māori did do that and were taught those skills by the Patupaerohe.
Well, if you know the Easter Islands and you've ever seen the Moia statues out there, the Polynesian race were very capable at designing rock art or large statues. They
Maybe
knew how to do masonry.
Maybe you don't know just how capable, Joe. They were recently excavated around. You know how they're just the heads? They excavated, and they're not just heads, bro. They're all the way down.
Hell's teeth, really?
They're like 3-4 times as tall as anybody thought. So whatever methodology we think they managed to do that now was still amazing and we still can't explain it. Imagine it 10 times as technologically advanced. Not to mention Māori and 186 other cultures around the world have stories of a great flood that wiped everything out. So if there was an ancient civilization here, it would have been wiped out.
See, Joe, why are you so sensitive to it? It doesn't matter how they got here anyway. There's various views. The question is, the thing is that the kaumātua, in a time when they didn't have this sort of money grubbing going on and they could afford to be honest about their history, it's there in their histories. You know, even Ranganui Walker in his Struggle Without End book said that when the people got here, they were met by these other people and they fought them.
They called them the, what was it they called them? The surveyors, I think, because they were all on the top of the hills and stuff all the time.
Right through. Martin Dutre is such a racist that he went and lived with a whole lot of Maori people for quite some years when he was younger.
Sounds like a bad guy to me.
Racists don't do that. I don't think Hitler was living in a kibbutz, you know.
He wasn't going to synagogue, was he?
Not a racist. He is a genuine seeker after the truth. You're trying to smear him, and I detest that. You're thrashing around trying to come up with all sorts of nonsense. But, you know, the fact is there was this stone city in the Waipoua forest. It sounds fantastic. This tribe is covering it up. There were all these bones, which the honest Maori back in those days said, they're not ours. These larger-than-life people. Tasman saw these giants. We have Maori with red hair. Where did that come from? These are the sort of things you've got to look at. The people, the evidence that's here, and not grasp for straws on how they might or might not have got here. They evidently did get here, or at least that should be able to be discussed without iwi closing down the discussion. Now, here's another chart. I think if you can see this.
Bring it up all the way.
Evidence.
I don't know, back and up. Sorry, John. Way back.
I can't see, you see. So
pull it back towards you, mate. Keep going.
But this is evidence
and stop.
This is evidence that evidence of these pre-Maori excavations were embargoed until
2063.
2063. Why would you do that if you had nothing to hide? Why would the state do that if it wasn't trying to cover it up? Why are there hundreds of sites around the country where this sort of stuff's been going on? I'm less interested in the facts of the matter. I don't understand the facts about the pre-Maori so much, but I'm interested in why the state and why the iwi want to cover it up so much.
It's funny you should mention that because just recently, John, I've been interviewing some guys who are researching into ancient American history. And it turns out, Wrigley's chewing gum, the Wrigley's family, not too long ago, I think back in the 1970s, they had a museum in Massachusetts where they had giant bones. And they were on display in all the cases and everything, and you could even purchase some at the gift shop from real giants.
These questions have to be answered. They do sound fantastic. But we should have the debate. Joe should be debating with Martin on this one. Let Martin have a say for 2 hours, because he could talk for the whole time and it would be mind-boggling. The crew from Maori TV were tremendously impressed with what Martin was telling them. The journalist couldn't wait to cover it up, but she was pretty mind-boggled as well. Martin just kept making sense. That's the point. He keeps making sense. It's very hard to defeat him if you're not into the archaeology area. So we need to get an archaeologist to go up against him. Get the state's best archaeologist. He would be confident of explaining his position. Only when you get that would Joe probably be anywhere near convinced. He'd probably find some other way to denigrate Martin. But Martin would be very happy to go up against whoever the state says is their foremost archaeologist with the facts, as long as the other guy is going to respond with facts as well.
And I feel also we're both ganging up on Joe at this point. I'd like to allow you to respond, Joe, if you can.
Well, I can explain who Pataparahi are. They are... Pataparahi are mystical creatures similar to leprechauns in Ireland. They're pale-skinned and they're about 30 centimetres tall, the size of a smurf. What Dutri's done is why Māori get so insulted by this is he's hijacked our history or a fairy tale we have, and he's trying to use it to undermine treaty settlements, and is the sole purpose. If he can prove that Māori were here in New Zealand and colonised New Zealand after British Celtics, then some theory that he has is that this would undermine the treaty settlements, and because Māori were the interlopers.
No, he doesn't say that at all. It doesn't affect the treaty. Well, he might. I don't think he does.
I think his argument with the treaty is just the Littlewood Treaty. The ancient thing is just an archaeological interest to him.
Yeah, whoever might have been here before Maori, and it's the Kaumātua that told him not. You've got to argue with them who the Pataparahi were, and he's got these evidence of people with red hair and so on and white skin. That's physical evidence, but. It doesn't alter the fact that Maori were certainly the incumbents in 1840. Nobody's questioning that. It doesn't affect the treaty process whatsoever. It certainly affects the claim to indigeneity, but that is extinguished by Maori's own admission, quite proudly, that they are indigenous to the other side of the Pacific. So I don't think the pre-Maori changes all that much. It makes things pretty interesting. And it certainly undermines the claim that, we were here first. I don't think being here first has any bearing on anything anyway. I don't think that I'm more of a New Zealander because my first relatives came here in 1842 than my wife, who was an immigrant in 1993. Any more than your Maori forebears might have come here in 1350. I think it's irrelevant what time we got here in a democracy where all people are supposed to be equal.
Now, may I ask, Joe, what's more likely to you, that there was perhaps an ancient civilization that was passed, that maybe through oral tradition is now passed down and there's evidence for now, or that there's an oral tradition and evidence for blue smurfs, as you say? because that was something that I found very interesting, because what happens through oral traditions is that things that used to be real become sort of I don't know, romanticized or fantasized or something like that, and the truth gets lost over time. I would say that that's probably a bit more likely than there actually being fairies that we just can't find now, but that's me. Joe?
Yeah, I think what Martin Dutre's done is he's just taken a fairy tale and he's ran away with it. It's like me saying that that Māori managed to, at the time of Christ, managed to colonise England, and King Arthur was actually Māori, and also saying that what's that wizard that they used to have back then?
The Wizard of Oz? No?
Merlin.
Merlin?
Well, that's like me saying that Merlin was a great Māori taonga, and he actually came from the South Pacific, and they had travelled all the way to England. And it's really offensive to British history. And if I started up an organisation that said that Paul Moon, all of the national historians would call me out on it. They'd have issues with that type of history.
Look, it's a good line, but what you've got that's highly inconvenient is that your elders say the same stuff as Martin. They told Martin this stuff. Now, until you deal with that one, you haven't got a coherent argument. Why does Maori history? Why does David Rankin, who's a chief up in the north there, say that Te Tai Tokerau means on the tide from the Tokalaus? We just kind of drifted here, which must be even more offensive to you. And I'm not saying he's right. I'm just saying that he seems to think he is. So you've got all sorts of strains of opinion here, there, and everywhere that we can adopt to suit our agenda if we want to. Why bag a man who, you're prepared to accept that James Belich and Claudia Orange couldn't possibly spend their entire lives, perpetuating a left-wing myth. But you are prepared to accept that Martin Dutre can spend a greater part of his life coming up with far-fetched accounts, which he seems to be able to talk about at great length, but nobody seems to want to hear it. It's selective. You're being selective.
Well, that might be because historians, professional historians, and archaeologists, they use modern science when they investigate these things. Like they use DNA testing.
Yes.
They also use carbon dating.
Yes.
So Martin Dutre, I don't see that he's done any DNA testing on.
Well, you've been paying attention because there was a carbon dating done that dated something to do with a garden up in the Waipora city at something like 1700 BC, but of course that was shut down. Why are these things being shut down? You haven't responded to why these things, if they're so innocuous, are being locked away until everybody's dead. To 2063. Why would you do that if it's all just nonsense?
Where was that document from, John, exactly?
Well, that was the work. I've got the original one here somewhere, but I probably won't find it in time. But it was a request for the carbon dating evidence that somebody overheard one of the archaeologists from the Crown mentioning, and that's the response that came back. There was a senior archaeologist who discovered this stuff, but they were all shut down after the state discovered stuff they didn't really want to discover, of this so-called stone city with all sorts of stone houses and walls and things like that weren't particularly Maori in origin.
Yeah. There's hundreds of thousands of sites around the world that point to an advanced civilization that was incredible at working with stones, that had a global trade routes and things like that. All of it, the exact same thing happened, John. The exact same thing. All the testing's blocked, all the people get demonised, and it gets rejected out of the media, they get called names and all of that kind of stuff. And none of the people that are attacking them or arguing against them have ever even read it into their research. And if they have, they deny its existence in the first frickin' place.
I mean, it's utterly fascinating to everybody, but why aren't there documentaries about it with people on both sides going hammer and tongs? So that we at home can sort of figure out who's telling the truth or who isn't. But those documentaries aren't allowed to be made. Now, thanks to Maori TV, Martin and us bringing along a second camera, Martin is making a documentary about his tour on that day that wasn't shown, and the things that he said, and footage that he has from other times. So they've been very helpful in making that happen. But why isn't it on the History Channel? Why isn't, they broadcast evidence for much less.
Well, I've put it on YouTube for Martin, and Martin's written a book and all of that. You've seen the thing on YouTube. You've read the book, haven't you, Joe?
What book's that?
I'll take that as a no.
It was called Celtic New Zealand, wasn't it? I haven't read it either, but I just know this guy. He's a mild-mannered guy. He's not a racist. He's a very thorough researcher, and he's able and willing to debate anybody, anytime, anywhere about anything. That to me suggests a pretty good, either completely deluded sort of sociopath or something, or he's what he claims he is. I think he's what he claims he is, and I just wish, and I notice that nobody will debate him. And I notice the same thing on climate change, and that's what makes me...
Same thing on climate change, same thing on 9/11.
Why not stage the debate,
today, here, for example, here we are, gentlemen, we're having a genuine debate about a real issue that actually affects this country, and both sides are allowed to speak. Why is that not happening with all of these major issues in our country? I'll tell you why, because whoever's in control doesn't want them to. Now, it might be like a feeding frenzy, where every shark has its own agenda, but they all have the same target.
I think it's called a democracy, and I thank you for the opportunity to have this debate, and I think, Joe, we agreed at half-time that we're both getting a fair shake. That's what you want in a democracy. If I stuff up, if I tell porkies and Joe can prove it, then that's bad for me, but I've had my chance, and that's all we want. We want a chance to put our view in the public to see both sides, and that should happen on everything.
Do you believe that to be true, Joe, even if you don't agree with what people's opinions are, that they should be able to at least say their piece?
Most certainly. I'd like to get write a response to some of the comments that John's made. Well, the only history I've read of New Zealand is the Penguin History of New Zealand by Michael King. And that's quite a credible source of history, and it says despite a plethora of conspiracy theories of Phoenicians and a whole lot of other civilizations, he makes it very clear the first civilization or the first people to make the shores of New Zealand are Polynesians. There's no one else. There's no other civilization. But also, John mentioned David Rankin as some kaumātua. Well, he's not. David Rankin's actually no one within Ngāpuhi. He's holds no ranking, despite the what he says is otherwise. But with the whole alternate history that Martin Dutre has portrayed, the New Zealand archaeology...
How much do you know about what he said, though? I mean, again, you haven't seen his presentation on YouTube or read his book, so you don't know what alternative history he's talking about, do you, Joe?
I have seen his YouTube clip. But
how long was it? Was it the hour-and-a-half one where he does the full slide presentation?
No, it's got some funny music to it. But what I'm getting at is the New Zealand Archaeological Society have denied these alternate histories emphatically. They've said that all these entire histories are based on racism and nothing more.
Yeah, bureaucrats tend to do that, and societies tend to do that sort of thing. Do you accept Michael's view on the massacre of the Moriori in the Chatham Islands? Because he's wrote a book about that as well. I'd like to put up this slide here, which talks about the real Waitangi we should be thinking about, the one in the Chatham Islands where women were staked to the beach and then slaughtered and eaten and so on. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that, unfortunately, you have to accept that Michael King also talked about. But you're saying that because Michael King wrote the definitive history of New Zealand as perceived by the establishment, that we must believe him and him only. And Paul When it suits you, you believe Paul Moon. You don't believe him when he writes this horrid practice about the cannibalism, but you believe him when he says things that you do agree to. I'm saying that all history is contestable. None of us were there. We don't know what really happened. That's the nature of history. We can only accept the assumptions of people who've studied, and Martin has studied it, as well as Michael King. You know, he's just as intelligent as Michael King and those other guys, and he deserves to put his evidence and be allowed to have his evidence considered. Michael King may never have seen it. He certainly took a lot of trouble to go over to the Chatham Islands and see the evidence there, and he wrote about that. You know, I'm just saying, give a guy a fair go. Don't demonise him because you don't agree with his agenda or his findings. Give the guy a go. Put him on this program, Vinny, up against Joe, or if there's a better person than Joe that can argue the toss about archaeology, give him his go. I reckon he'd lap it up. Then we'd see what we make of Martin Dutre, you know, in a fair debate.
Now, on top of this, there's the other element here is, in my opinion, the establishment in anything tends to be wrong most of the times about things, but you only find out that they're wrong in the fullness of time. For example, do you believe that JFK was the result of a conspiracy or a lone gunman?
I think he was the result of a sexual act between his parents, but that's just my view.
But in the fullness of time, so much things have come out, like the Zapruder film, etc., that have disproven and shown that every element of the official story has been debunked and is simply not true. However, what is the truth doesn't get accepted and brought into the mainstream consciousness, even though approximately 90% of Americans don't believe the establishment official account.
It's certainly true that we enjoy these things. You know, we kind of want to believe that it was a CIA plot or there was another gunman, and we kind of enjoy the idea that the American government might have brought down the World Trade Center. It's attractive, you know.
I don't know about you, but the thought that there's a criminal... I'm not sure, John. I think that the fact that there might be a criminal element in charge of the United States that would kill its own president, much less 3,000 of its own citizens, is not a comforting thought to me, nor anybody who truly studies it.
Choice of word, attractive. It's not. It's attractive from the...
Intriguing, I think, is the word.
From the sort of water cooler discussion point of view, we all like to have views on stuff, and we all like to, you know, believe that far-fetched things are going on, and we've got to discount all that. You know, I used to believe in, at school, I read the books of Bruce Cathy about the, harmonic 695, harmonic 30. All very attractive. You know, evidence for UFOs and so on. I'm still not saying it's wrong. I don't know, but it was kind of not. It was fun to want to believe it anyway. But you've got to discount all that if you're honest, and you've got to give both sides a fair go, and you've got to behave as though you're some sort of jury in a court of law. And I find that increasingly, or maybe it's just that I'm getting more interested, but I see things like the climate debate, and you see vested interests on both sides putting up very plausible cases, and God knows where the truth is. You just, but it's the same with this this treaty debate. You know, we're both, I think, honestly trying to find the truth of these matters. I'm saying that Joe and co have a vested interest that I don't have. Do I really, am I really trying to create a legacy for myself as a racist? Is that really where I get my jollies? I tell you I'm not. I don't. Why would you? Maybe I'm just trying to speak up for people that aren't being heard, who just happen to be the majority, the hoodwinked majority. Maybe Joe and co are doing it for the money.
How do you respond to that? Oh, actually, before you do, I have another idea, because there are vested interests, and when in politics, who I vote for is either the person who gets most left out of the media or most demonised by the media. In New Zealand, that tends to be Hone Harawira and New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters. But anyway, Joe, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, as John showed that little chart of his about the Chatham Islands and Moriori, I actually do accept the history of Michael King because he's a professional historian. I've got no other reason to.
So was James Cameron.
But where it comes unstuck for you, John, and also Martin Dutre, is you're talking about what the mainstream of New Zealand perceive as a conspiracy theory. But you're also, on the other hand, you're trying to convince the public of New Zealand that Alan Titford's innocent. Now,
Right.
you either drop these conspiracy theories, or how are people supposed to believe is that Alan Titford's been framed?
What do you want me to tell you? I mean, I provided evidence. I don't actually have it here, but I gave it to the girl from Maori TV, and she wouldn't put it on. An affidavit that a friend of Susan Titford's, Alan's sister-in-law, who didn't get on with Alan, said that she heard Sue say that her father confessed on his deathbed to burning down the house that she subsequently went and said that Alan burnt down. That's evidence. That's not proof, but that's evidence. That's as good evidence as there was in the whole of the rest of the trial, where basically her word was accepted for the things that Alan was supposed to have done, 39 things. He's been locked up for 24 years. No one believes that's fair. 24 years for crimes in which no one died. That is a state fit-up, at least the sentence is. Where else do you get a Minister of the Crown, John Carter, working with a wife in a property, in a marital separation case? Why would he do that, do you think? The rapes, I could go on. And one of the rapes, she said, happened on or about the 7th of July 2009. She told the police that in her own diary. She didn't say that. She said, Alan wanted sex. I said, no, he pushed me out of bed. Now, that's not very nice. It's the opposite of rape, however. So I'm putting up evidence, Joe, one after the other. I could go on, and you'll probably say that it doesn't account for anything. There's no reason why you could possibly find him innocent. I'm saying there's every reason why you could find him innocent. First of all, the state has a real reason to lock this bugger up because he proved that the treaty claim on his farm that cost him his farm was a fraud. I can go into detail on that, and I've done it on my blog tonight in the complaint by Mike Baker to the Broadcasting Standards Authority, a whole list of questions that should be put to those people who were just blindly believed, like Paul Moon, like Alex Nathan, like, who was the other one? I think Ranganui Walker. Just blindly believed. We're putting up evidence all the time. Martin Dutre does nothing but put up evidence. I put up evidence and you just laugh at it, you know. Well, I laugh at you for laughing at it because you should be coming up with corresponding evidence. I'm saying a man was put away for 24 years for crimes he most likely didn't commit. There's certainly evidence he didn't commit the bigger ones. And you're just sort of laughing it off, I suppose.
So, well, hold on. Did he actually? What's the current penalty for murder in New Zealand? It's like life in prison, isn't it?
Look,
with good behaviour, 25 years.
Murderers have got less than that. Graham Burton, one of the worst murderers, got 26 years. You know, Titford did nothing on that scale and got 24. Ask yourself. And the judge started his sentencing at 36, can you believe? You know, William Bell got 33. It is just so obviously corruption on behalf of that judge and all the people surrounding the case. The police, people who bashed Titford up because he complained that the Maori were molesting him. That's why the father-in-law burnt the house down, incidentally, because it was the only way he could think of to get his daughter away from the threats and harassment and violence from Te Roro. That's why I wasn't going to, apologise to them when Mihi Nairangi Forbes seemed to think that the highest priority was to apologise to Te Roro, not to Alan Titford. It's just one of the policemen actually apologised, most heartfelt apology to Titford for the harassment that he delivered upon him and others. But Titford said, "Will you repeat it in public?" The guy said, "No, it'll affect my new career." So Titford said, "Well, I don't accept your apology then. Why should I?" But, there's so much scandal going on in the last 20 or 30 years over him. His wife still believes that the research they did was accurate. So it doesn't affect the fact that he's been demonised, like you guys try to demonise Martin Dutre and me. And, well, Titford was the arch enemy, so he was thoroughly demonised. But even if he did all those things as charged, as sentenced, doesn't alter a jot the work he did on the Te Rōroa claim and the fact that was all shonky. There's no logic that connects the two. And his wife and he both agreed on that, which is remarkable considering she is out to get him in every other way. She admits that the Maoris shot the stock and did certain other things, but she claims, when it suits her, that Alan burnt the house down, even though her father now did. But, so that's something I want to get out, is that there's no connection between the two, but somehow the media have bought the idea that because he's this violent person in other parts of his life, that he must therefore be dishonest, which has nothing to do with violence, regarding the forensic work that he did on the claim. It doesn't connect.
Can I get write a response on this, Vinny?
We're waiting. Go for your life, man.
Okay. Alan Titford is guilty as charged. Titford knew for 20 years that the people of Te Rāroa had not committed any crime. They hadn't burnt down his house, but he was silent. He didn't let anyone know. He didn't approach the police force. He just kept quiet about it. And what Alan Titford is could you let me finish, John? Sure. What Alan Titford is a set of coincidences. First off, his boat mysteriously sinks. He gets insurance money for that, and then he goes in from that insurance money and he buys a farm. And then what happens is his house mysteriously burns down, and the Waitangi tribunal end up giving him $3 million. Now that's a set of three coincidences that I just don't really buy. And then, now that he's sitting in prison, he's blaming it all on a dead patsy and he's passing the blame on to the father-in-law. What Alan Titford is guilty of is he made Māori in Te Rāroa look like this avaricious group who are just very greedy, when it wasn't the truth. He turned Northland into Mississippi burning. He created so much racial tension that Māori hated Pākehā and Pākehā hated Māori. And if John honestly believes that Alan's getting a fair deal, well, I can bring up some examples of some Māori activists. There's Benjamin Petty Nathan, who damaged the America's Cup, and he got 2 years imprisonment, and Ned Sykes was actually his lawyer, and all he did was attack a bit of steel. Now Titford's been out raping people, committed perjury, committed arson, and he gets 24 years. Of course he should get 24 years. Also, Mike Smith just went up to One Tree Hill and chopped down a tree. No one was hurt. They're just destroying sentimental things. And Mike Smith ended up getting 6 months periodic detention. So if John thinks that Alan's getting off lightly, well, what about activists who are Māori? They don't get off lightly.
I don't think you're listening to anything. I mean, getting off lightly? I think Alan's getting off lightly, you're saying? 24 years? That's what you said just then. But look, where do I start? Sunk the boat. Well, the boat was made of steel. There was petrol tanks there. You can't take an axe to a steel boat, as Sue Titford maintains. You said that the Waitangi Tribunal gave him $3 million. When? He bought his farm for $600,000. When he was forced to sell it, he got $200,000. The Maori TV program, quite mischievously, if that's probably the least of it, said that he made 5 times as much as he paid for it. Well, first of all, there was quite a lot of inflation at that time between those two dates, but he had to pay back mortgages that he couldn't afford to pay because the tribe occupied the land. He couldn't develop his beachfront property. That was the whole reason why he bought the farm, so that he could make a profit developing the beachfront property, and so he could pay his mortgage back. There were other costs as well. He had to that included his stock, 700,000. Just complete misinformation from start to finish, Joe. I don't know. I just don't know. When I hear stuff like that, I just think that there is a lower threshold of honesty going on here. It seems to be endemic in Maoridom. Treachery seems to be tolerated from the days when Maui double-crossed his mother, and it's still going on. Treachery in battle and treachery in debate. We've got to have some sort of basis of truth before we can have a meaningful debate, and you're not coming from truth. You're coming from propaganda and indoctrination. Once again, I'm putting up facts, and you're spouting stuff that you've heard somewhere from someone biased. But, if you look at that case forensically, he proved that claim was wrong, and he has been vilified for it. And that is the most ghastly thing that has happened in New Zealand for some time, and you're excusing it. You're saying that he deserved 24 years. Even if he had done those 3 rapes and the arson, which you're very happy to accept that the father-in-law had done because it exonerates Te Roro. Alan quite logically suspected Te Roro. They were doing so many other things to him, but even he came to the conclusion later on that it probably wasn't them. He couldn't understand what was in it for them doing that, so he had expressed that. He was prepared to change his mind, and rightly so. The first he heard of his father-in-law burning down the house was about the same time I heard it, when the affidavit come in. It wasn't from, as Mihi Nairangi Forbes said, one of the Titford family. It was one of the Cochrane family. It was his in-laws who didn't get on with him. So just complete misinformation.
Joe, do you have a response?
Well, I think the only person who we need to look at here for treachery is Alan Titford. He's very treacherous. One of the things that he made a vast mistake on was he knew that he would upset Te Raroa if he went and subdivided the land, because one of the things that he knew about the land, it was an urupa or a cemetery, and what the local iwi were upset about is they just wanted to connect with their dead ancestors in this cemetery or urupa. So this would fly in all the face of common sense. When you know there's racial tension, why would you go and subdivide land, upsetting the people even further?
Because
to pay off a mortgage is what he said.
Yeah, to pay the mortgage. Why would you?
If you bought some land, then subdivided it so you could pay off the mortgage so that you wouldn't have to keep working for the rest of your life until you were dead to pay it off, wouldn't you?
It's like Dover Samuels. I mean, he said, look, the white man is an idiot. Once you put a cloak on him, he turns to jelly. He said, look, we can make a claim that there's bones of our ancestors. We're such a bloodthirsty lot. There's bones of our ancestors up and down every beach in New Zealand, so we can claim the lot. Just because you got a few bones in there, you're supposed to have cared so deeply for their ancestors. Why do they slaughter them in such numbers and eat them? But the point is, it was the 20th century then. He paid a fair price for his land. He's entitled to use his land. If there are some bones there, well, so what? Why does that give someone else the right to come into his land? Those guys were threatening to kill. I think, I've got to be a bit careful about who I name, but I think that Harawira was there. I think Shane Jones might have been in there on that protest. You just don't do, in a civilised society, you don't go and occupy someone else's land. You go through the legal channels to apply for it, but you don't go and occupy, you don't go sticking a bloody pole on someone else's land, you don't go shooting the stock. You seem to think, with your morals, that you can do that. And that's what disgusts so many New Zealanders, that Maori think they can walk onto someone else's land that's been paid for and do whatever they like and disrupt his living. Well, he is a very determined man, and he wasn't going to put up with that, and he's paid quite a high price.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say that's true for a moment here. And then just ask if the reverse happened today, if a bunch of Pākehā walked onto a marae that was recently built, for example, saying that there used to be some Pākehā cemetery that wasn't marked there or something like that, would they be able to come onto the land and confiscate it from Māori, occupy it, that kind? No, there'd be huge uproar. But the reverse is not true. And I think the reason why there's like an 80% or whatever of support of John's kind of theories and findings and whatnot is because maybe there's a little bit of racism involved, perhaps. I know, John, we've spoken privately. You've told me that there's a lot of racists that support you, and you don't support them, and you don't like to read their emails and whatnot. And when they comment on your blog sites, you tell them to clean up their act.
Yeah.
So there's one element there, but the other element is people who believe in things like law, private property rights.
You can't have it both ways. You can't sign a treaty that where you sign up to the laws of the British Empire, for better or worse, and then you just take them into your own hands. I mean, that's just corrupt. And, you've got to go through the process. And when it suits Maori, they're very happy with British law. When it doesn't, they're not. In 1941, again, for the second time, I think the first time was 1896, the law found that there was no case to answer over that the claim that there were two reserves, or they should have been provided in the sale of that land in 1876, I think it was. There was a pro-Maori judge who was an underling of the ultimate judge who thought that there was, but the ultimate judge, the chief judge, said there wasn't, so it was game over. But of course that never stops radical Maori these days. They open it up because they know they can get away with it, because they know they've got a kangaroo court called the Waitangi Tribunal that was set up deliberately to find in their favour, and guess what? It did. Well, that doesn't impress fair-minded people.
May I ask, John or Joe, if you know the statistics on it, how many times has the Waitangi Tribunal not ruled in favour of the Māori claimant?
I'm not aware of.
Has it ever happened? Once?
I haven't studied the Waitangi Tribunal, but what did happen with the Alan Titford case is a law got passed through that private land was not to be used for treaty settlements, and because Alan Titford had been getting around burning down his own home, New Zealand law was influenced. So this was the 80% getting it wrong.
That's because the various prime ministers had promised. David Longy saying so in so many words that there will not, you know how he used to talk, yes, there will not be one farmer losing his land to a treaty claim. And of course, he either was lying or he certainly got it wrong, because the Titfords certainly did lose their land to a treaty claim. And there was much more corruption involved than I've probably got time to outline, but they doctored the sale agreement. You know, Titford was prepared in the end, after his parents were threatened by the state with, by the Rural Bank, with taking their own farm, because it was collateral over the farm which Titford couldn't afford to pay for anymore because the Maoris had occupied the thing and made it unviable. Nobody wanted to buy his sections. He reluctantly agreed in the end to accept a lower sum, but he changed the agreement. He said, I'm signing this, this and this, but I'm not signing this, this and this. Now, that was his opinion, and that's what he signed. And the Crown Law Office, who are extremely culpable in this, people like Scary Mary Ann Thompson, who was subsequently found guilty of that immigration fraud, people like her doctored that sale agreement to rub out Titford's amendments. Now, that is a very shonky piece of work, and that is what the state does not want to get out there, and that's why I'm putting it out there. Things like that. Facilitating Maori claims because it was worth votes, and frankly, because people were intimidated. Peter Tapsell said to Titford, look, it's not fair, but I can't control my people. They're violent. They're going to get you. You'd really better get off the land and go and live somewhere else, because it's not going to stop. And it's that intimidation that I'm sickened by when it comes to radical Maori, and that's why I'm standing up.
And indeed, this happened to you at Waitangi Day, wasn't it? Wasn't there somebody trying to intimidate you there, John?
Oh, yes. I was invited on to Te Marae by the Sunday Star Times reporter Simon Day. I was uncomfortable about doing our interview there. But I followed him on, and this big Maori guy said, I've had enough of this, after he'd heard me talking for a while, and he ushered us off. And I said to him as I left, I said, actually, I support you. I don't think I should have been there either. But the same guy, when Mike Butler and I were protesting across the road as John Key was coming out, we had our Treaty Gate sign up there, and this same guy, big burly guy, thuggish sort of guy, tried to rip our banner down. And I said, look, you can't do it out here, mate. I was wrong to be in there. I've acknowledged that, but you're wrong to menace us out here. Mike had encountered too many Maori tenants behaving like that towards him as a landlord, and was not keen to get into a dispute. I actually was, because I thought it was the only way we get on TV. But yeah, that was minor thuggery, but that wasn't pleasant. But at least I showed up, and I was the only one who did show up from the entire 80%, and Mike, and we had our say. But once again, we expected violence, and we got a certain amount of it, not too much.
And you don't approve of violence, even if it's Māori against Pākehā, do you, Joe?
Oh, no, of course not. I think what's happened up there at Waitangi is they're trying to cut back on the radical activism, so I think they'd start with John. How many other activists like John are up there doing that kind of thing? Oh, they have a couple of protests up there, but as John was mentioning, that he claimed that Te Araroa are a violent group. Well, history's actually proven that they're not violent, that Alan Titford is a violent criminal that rapes people. And he also mentioned in a modern society that you just don't do that. Well, first off, in a modern society, you don't confiscate land. The land there was an urupa, and it was actually reserve, inalienable land. And what happened is the government sold it to the Titfords when it should never have been sold in the first place. It was a reserve that belonged to Te Araroa. So they've got a fair grievance there.
Now, you said that they were trying to shut down certain points of activism. In your opinion, what kinds of activism should be shut down?
Radical activism like Treaty Gate. That's just a nasty hate group, Treaty Gate. So it should absolutely be shut down.
Yeah, if it's non-violent, it can be shut down anyway. If it's not proposing terrorism or anything like that, it can be shut down anyway. Or, well, I mean, let's think about the offences. Because with me, the only kinds of activism that should be shut down are those that breach common law. That's damage to private property and damage to human life, whether that be killing or maiming. Those are the only types of activism that I believe should be shut down.
See, Treaty Gate is me sitting in this chair with this computer. There's no group. There's just me and people who read what I write. You want to shut that down. You don't believe in free speech. You're scared of it. You're scared of free speech, but you'll condone your own. You don't mind if the whole state machinery of education is corrupted to present your biased view of history. That's okay. That shouldn't be shut down. Just this lone guy who says things which are inconveniently disruptive of your indoctrinated views, that should be shut down. And I suppose Martin should be shut down, and Ross Baker's One New Zealand Foundation should be shut down. All of your opponents should be shut down. Well, guess what that resembles, Joe? Another Joe in Russia. Shut down your opponents. I think we've got to the real agenda of the Mana Party now. This is why Annette Sykes says that we should be having a process of decolonisation. Well, that's very similar to the Cambodian, the Khmer people saying, let's clear the fields. That's very bloody sinister, Joe, to shut down your opponent. I say, give full voice to my opponents. Let them embarrass themselves, or make sense, or ridicule me, or whatever. Maybe I win, maybe they win. But let's have the debate. It's right, it's fair, both sides heard. But you don't want my side to be heard. Now, that's going to be very interesting when viewers see this.
Oh, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be heard. I'm just saying that you should be classified as precisely as what your group is. It's a hate group. There's no two ways about it.
Yes, there are.
Well,
There are two ways.
here's an example of how it is a hate group. You just want to get one law for all,
Yep.
one foundation New Zealand, Treaty Gate. You just want to acquire absolutely nothing for poor Pākehā. In fact, the Mana Party has many policies that cater for poor Pākehā. They realise there's a housing crisis. They want to get housing for poor Pākehā. But all these hate groups, they are fighting for absolutely nothing for poor Pākehā. All they are is a tool for the 1% that control 50% of the economy to be used as a distraction.
I've got no views on, Algerians, people in Tuvalu. I haven't got views about abortion. That's not what Treaty Gate is about. Treaty Gate is about rectifying an injustice that has been perpetrated on the people of New Zealand by a fraction of 15% of New Zealand. Of course we don't have views about poor Pākehā. That's not the issue. We're not a political party. I'm just me. All those groups, they've got to be in their bonnet about the lies being told by people like you who stand there and say something is just because you want it to be. It's just wishful thinking. We wheel up evidence and you say, that's not right. This is true. What you say is not true. And you don't require any evidence at all. Well, I think the viewers of this program will make up their own minds about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, you talked about an injustice. What you're talking about is in this injustice is anything awarded to Māori as an assault on the civil rights of mainstream Pākehā. That's absurd. There's no injustice going on. All we're doing here is honouring our country's founding national document, the Treaty of Waitangi.
Look,
and that's what is the basis of this nation that makes it a great nation, when we look after our indigenous people.
Well, the ones who came from the other side of the Pacific.
What does the word indigenous mean, Joe? Does it mean they migrated here from another land, as the Māori say that they did? Or does that mean they migrated here first before somebody else did?
I've heard the United Nations version of the indigenous people, and it includes Māori. Māori are indigenous. And also,
no, I mean
Māori
the definition of the
indigenous.
actual word.
It's not the actual definition, it's the United Nations socialist dictator gang definition. It's the poor brown people that were there when the evil white people came. That's what Joe's definition of indigenous is. It's nothing to do with the actual word. It's just a self-serving definition that happens to suit radical Maori. But
I'm sorry, we cut Joe off in the middle of his response. Please, Joe, continue.
sorry.
Oh, no. Allow John to continue. I'm not sure what the actual definition, but I do know that the United Nations believe that Māori are indigenous. Probably because Governor General Jerry Mataparai opened the inauguration of the Indigenous Conference in New York just a few weeks ago. So.
Oh yeah. Yes, and Annette Sykes was talking in the green room about the hotels in Waikiki that she's going off to stay in for a global Indigenous Peoples Conference. I mean, surely it should be in a grass hut, but no, we've got to have the flashest hotel. But I don't know where we're getting with this really, because you keep coming back to the treaty being the founding document. The founding document of New Zealand actually was the Royal Charter of November in 1840, which was the document by which New Zealand became a separate colony to New South Wales. But the treaty is always the thing that comes up. The treaty was a sort of permission slip by which the Maori gave sovereignty to the British in exchange for retaining their property rights, the stuff that they used, not every invention of the white man that they might take a shine to in 100 years' time, their property, their land, their stuff, the land that they were working with and living on, in exchange for equal membership of the British Empire and protection from the French and each other, which was the real fear. But we have this thing that the treaty is the founding document. It was certainly the first document that was signed after the arrival of Hobson. The document that erected New Zealand as a colony was the Royal Charter of, I think it was the 16th of November, which eventually made way for the status of colony to be created in May 1841, I think it was. That's your founding.
Gentlemen, we've already gone well over time.
Can I respond to that one quickly?
Would you like to take a break and then respond to it afterwards? And we can do another 10 to 20 minute wrap up, or even a half. I mean, something tells me this debate would never end if you give it sufficient time. So I say let's give it a little bit more time. Would you be prepared to stay on for a little bit longer, John?
Certainly.
Oh yeah, by all means.
Okay.
I'm amazed by your energy. Mine's starting to flag a bit, but that's good.
Okay, this is why we take breaks.
Yep.
Because caffeine is necessary.
Okay.
We will be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, after a wee caffeine break and a wiki leak, make sure you go to thevinnieeastwoodshow.com and make a donation or subscribe to give a regular gift into the bank account or the PayPal there. Also check out our sponsors, the High Tea Cafe in New Lynn, the Gourmet Soap Kitchen in Wagga Wagga, almost say Gourmet Soup Kitchen there, which was how I introduced her on my radio show the first time when I interviewed her. Frick, that was embarrassing. You should go back and listen to that interview, ladies and gentlemen, with Angela Foreman. That's some funny stuff, man. Anyway, she makes ridiculously good soap. Like, whoa. Especially, and I want to make a recommendation here. If you're going to go to the Gourmet Soap Kitchen, you're going to buy yourself a bar of soap, get yourself the cinnamon and oat bar, bro. That stuff is invigorating. It's like heroin to your skin, but not quite as pleasurable. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this extended episode of the Vinnie Eastwood Show. Just thought as I mentioned in the end of the first segment, if this debate was a coffee bean, it'd be a Robusta. And quite frankly, sometimes you feel like you need more than one coffee in the morning in order to get you up, in order to get everything sussed out in your head. And I don't think this debate's quite over. And even if I gave you another 25 hours or something like that of straight radio, the debate still wouldn't be over. If anything, having, in my opinion, probably one of the first kind of open format, honest debates on the topic and being able to hear both sides equally without anybody shouting each other down. I apologise, I appear to be more on John's side of this debate tonight, Joe, no disrespect. But I think it's been good to hear both sides in their fullness, and maybe this will help to trigger even further debate and get the issues truly opened up and resolved once and for all. This is my hope. And gentlemen, thank you very much for participating. So who would like to go next? Have you been reviewing notes and stuff over the breaks? I've noticed both of you have. And I believe Joe has a right of response to what John and I were last talking about. So, Joe, if you please.
Yeah, so John was talking about the Queen's Royal Charter that was made on the 16th of November 1840. So the Queen's Royal Charter is 9 months after the Treaty of Waitangi. And what it declares is the government of New South Wales has sovereignty over New Zealand. So it'll be a really good founding document if we were trying to prove we were Australians. Secondly, the Queen's Charter has never been to New Zealand, so you can hardly call a document the Queen's Royal Charter or a founding document if it's never ever been to your country, because, the Magna Carta has been to Great Britain, the Declaration of Independence has been to the United States. So, and one of the problems all of these hate groups have is one foundation and Treatygate. They all claim all the other founding national documents, but the original Māori Treaty of Waitangi. So they have the Littlewood paper. I don't call it a treaty; it's just a scrap piece of paper found in South Auckland, and they also have the Queen's Royal Charter. So there's a lot of inconsistencies here, and what they're doing is putting up all of these other founding national documents that they find in South Auckland, as opposed to the original Māori version of the Treaty of Waitangi. In fact, I find founding national documents all over here in South Auckland. I've got a copy here of the Magna Carta, and this is the original of the what's that? American Declaration of Independence on George Washington. So I just find them all lying around. There's a couple lying around here that they're just everywhere. But normally, what most New Zealanders do is they go with the original Māori version of the Treaty of Waitangi and accept that as their founding national document.
Do that, like 80%. Well, anyway, a wonderful speech, but you think that the Queen Victoria's Royal Charter isn't in New Zealand. Do you think that the National Archives is not part of New Zealand? Because that's where it is, mate. It's got a gold seal and everything. It looks very much like, it's not a scrappy document like either the Littlewood document or the Maori Treaty, which is a pretty scrappy document as well. It's a very ornate document with a big gold seal hanging off it. It couldn't be more ceremonial. It doesn't make a huge difference, I don't think. Some people on my side say it makes all the difference in the world. I don't know that it matters which was the founding document. The Waitangi document was certainly, the treaty was certainly the first document, and it was the document by which the chiefs ceded sovereignty in that very good deal where they became equal members of the British Empire. But it just wasn't the document that created New Zealand. It didn't create the colony of New Zealand. It's just an unarguable fact. The Royal Charter created the colony of New Zealand. It separated us from the existing colony of New South Wales. There's no argument about that. I don't even know what the big deal is, really. But that was the document that founded, and that is arguably the founding document that we should be celebrating, that created our colony. I don't know what the point is you're making. You want to celebrate the Waitangi Treaty because it suits you, because you can attract attention to it and you attribute to it all sorts of things that weren't actually there. I mean, the great con job was the fact that the treaty that we talk about today is not the Treaty of Waitangi, it's the Treaty of Wellington 1989 that Geoffrey Palmer made up out of thin air. You know, the so-called principles of the treaty. You know, British law does not provide for nebulous principles. It's what is written is what is in every other law, but no, not when it comes to the treaty. It's what was imagined is what is. You know, what was imagined to be in the minds of those chiefs. Well, I think what was in the minds of those chiefs was probably what came out of their mouths on the Treaty House lawn. You know, that was pretty clear that they knew they were giving up sovereignty. Anyway, I've diverted a wee bit, but the treaty I want to put into the public domain, the Treaty of Wellington 1989, the fictional principles of the treaty that created the so-called partnership. Yes, there probably was a partnership, but partnerships don't have to be equal. There's no way that Queen Victoria would have agreed to an equal partnership with, 70,000, chiefs that couldn't organise themselves into a nation to start with. They were just a whole lot of disparate tribes at each other's throats. I mean, that wasn't the British Empire's way. I don't know if you've noticed. But it wasn't an equal partnership that you like to pretend it is. It was a perfectly legitimate arrangement between two quite different types of entity. One, the greatest empire on earth, the other, a bunch of tribes who were quite numerous in these islands. The Colonial Secretary, Lord Normanby, issued a 4,000-word document to Governor Hobson, Lieutenant Governor Hobson, saying, do not take these islands by force. If the tribes don't want, if the chiefs don't want the arrangement, just sail away. We're not in that game anymore. We're wet liberals now. And if they want it, then we'll do it. Otherwise, we're not really interested in another colony. Now, that's the fact of the matter, Joe. There's quite a few things I'd like to get out that I haven't said yet, but I'm not quite sure what is the appropriate time to do that.
I'd say proceed unless Joe wants to respond.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. It would be lovely to have the Queen's Royal Charter as our founding national document if we wanted to be Australians. But I'd actually prefer to be a New Zealander and have a document as our founding national document that has been signed by New Zealanders, people that were born here, as opposed to Australians. And I noticed John talked about the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi made by Geoffrey Palmer, the Prime Minister at the time. Well, The principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, what they did is they bridged the power held by government and local government and the Treaty of Waitangi. So what they did is they brought it to the fore. So what you had is, for the first time in 100 years, city councils had to actually go out and visit the local marae. They actually had to acknowledge that New Zealand wasn't just this place that didn't have any culture or didn't have any founding national document. You had city councillors and mayors that actually had to go out and meet people who were indigenous.
Yeah, bribe the tribe. Yeah. They have to bribe the tribe if they want to do anything. That's the problem. It's not the treaty settlements. They'll be over soon. They'll be $3 billion, as you say, over 20 years. It's not huge. What really rubs people up the wrong way is having to bribe the tribe every time you want to do something. The tribe says, "Oh, we got a taniwha under here. You can't build the road unless you grease our palms, of course, and then we can make the taniwha go away." That's just corruption, and that's what really sticks in people's craw. It's the bribe the tribe mentality of having to pay off the iwi every time you want to do something. That is the real drain on this country that Maori are.
John, hold on here. Do you have any actual examples, like dollar amounts or particular instances or case studies where money has been given to tribes in order to go ahead with private projects?
Let me think about that. There's plenty of them. Do I have them at my disposal right now? How much did they pay the taniwha to go away? I'm not sure. It was certainly a large amount. There's another one up in Auckland. All the time they're having to, it's koha, it's supposedly koha. It's not co-governance, it's koha governance. That's what's going on. With every development, you have to. I got a friend, he wanted to build a state-of-the-art holiday home, a small holiday home, but it was done well with a proper sewage system. The sewage system happened to be too advanced for the council, but he had to get the permission of not only that council, but 3 separate iwi to make a house which was more robust than the council provided for in its regulations. But he had to go to 3 separate iwi for that. Why on earth would you have to do that in a fair country? Why would you have to go to a small group who make up a lot less than 15% of the population, especially if it's an iwi basis? Why would you need to do that? Where is the moral justification for that? I want to win this from the moral high ground. I don't want to just say, well, we'll take all Maori's privileges away. They shouldn't be there in the first place, and it should be done from a point of view of what is right and what is wrong. It's not right to do that. We're grown-ups now. We shouldn't be, paying homage to a group that really has no great claim, or no greater claim than anybody else. Why don't we go to the Chinese? Why don't we go to the Pākehās? We don't. I don't want to live in a white country. I don't want to live in any particular coloured country. I want to live in a multicultural country. It's very vibrant. I don't want the I don't want the radical
Sharia law.
I don't want Sharia law, but that's the only objection I've really got to any culture. What is so wrong with that? What is so racist about that?
He does have a fair point, Joe.
Oh, once again, what he's doing is he's pretending that anything awarded to Māori is an attack on mainstream Pākehā rights. And it's the reverse racism argument again. There's nothing happening to you if the Crown offers Māori compensation for the Treaty of Waitangi. And what I'll do is I'll actually read out the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. And what they're actually designed to do is to bridge goodwill between the Crown and iwi. I'll read them out. The acquisition of sovereignty in exchange for the protection of rangatiratanga. The treaty established a partnership and imposed on the partners the duty to act reasonably and in good faith. The freedom of the Crown to govern. The Crown's duty of active protection. The duty of the Crown to remedy past breaches. Māori to retain rangatiratanga over their resources and taonga, and to have all the privileges of citizenship, and duly to consult. So these seem like very reasonable
They do, Joe, but
principles.
I've got a question. Why are the 2 Māori words in there, taonga and tēnā rangatiratanga, when everything else is English?
Okay, well,
Are there two separate versions, or is the English version got Māori words in it that aren't defined in it? Or how does it work? Is there a full English version with the actual translation of those words, te rangatiratanga, and the Dictionary of Modern Māori? Okay.
yeah. So taonga is a simple word. It means treasure. Of course, John's got an alternate meaning for the word that
Was the definition at the time.
Yeah.
But have we rewritten the treaty since the original, as you say, Joe, founding document? Is it a new treaty now that's got completely different wording to the treaty that was signed at the time by the chiefs on the lawn?
No, what it does is it bridges the gap between our founding national document, the Treaty of Waitangi, and local and central government. So what it does is it gets them to work with a bit of goodwill to each other. So we stop having these misunderstandings. I mean, duly to consult. I mean, how's that racial privilege? And they're using words like remedy past breaches. This is not racial privilege. It's trying to fix colonial history that's an unmitigated disaster.
So how long have these mitigating factors been going on for, and has the average Māori benefited, statistically speaking, from these redresses of grievances?
Well, from what I heard the Māori Party say on the minor debates is that the Māori economy is up to $42 billion, but I don't see that. I'm not aware of what it is. But if you were to take Ngāi Tahu, for instance, they've managed to take $100 million in treaty settlements, and they've now turned it into $5 billion in profit. So
here's a question on that, Joe. How many members of the tribe of Ngāi Tahu are there, and how many is the 100 million divvied up to?
Well,
or the several billion now. How many of those members of the tribe all have a stake? Does every member of the tribe by blood get a dividend check every year, as is customary with shareholders of a company? How does it work?
I'm not aware of the amount of money that they give each shareholder in Ngāi Tahu, because I'm not a member of Ngāi Tahu. I'm not on the trust.
Is Ngāi Tahu a tribe or a company?
It's a iwi tribe, but it has a trust that all its members are a party to. But
how does one become a member?
Well, what you have to do is you have to prove your ancestry into that iwi. But
So if somebody wants to become a part of this trust and get dividends every year, all they have to do is find some trace documents, like go to ancestry.com or some variant of that, and trace their lines back, and then they get sent a dividend check every year?
No, they have to register with the iwi after they've proved their ancestry.
Is registration free?
Yes, it is. I don't know in Ngāi Tahu. I can't speak for them. But what this
But not
argument...
everybody who's actually got ties to Ngāi Tahu currently has a share and is registered in it. So therefore, they're not actually representing the entirety of their tribe, are they? They're only representing those few who have the mental faculty and the education to be able to search their lineage and then register with an official kind of organisation like the Ngāi Tahu Trust.
Well,
which is disadvantages and basically cleans out most of poor Māori. I mean, even me, I don't have the education level to do that kind of thing.
I don't know that there's any. Is anyone complaining that they're not able to get into the tribe if they want to? I don't know. But what I'm arguing is that Ngāi Tahu were 2,000 strong in 1840. Scattered around the South Island, and they've now got 5 billion. Well, they're doing very well. There's nothing stupid about Maori people, but they don't deserve it. They shouldn't have got 170 million for 2,000 people when they'd sold the blooming whole island by then. But anyway, putting that behind us, that's neither here nor there. The Maori economy I thought it was 39 billion. It's 42 billion, and guess what? the bad stats are as bad as ever. You know, the crime, the rape, the suicides, all that, they're still as bad as ever, and they've been shoveled lots and lots of money. Obviously, it's not... Hone Harawira tried that on me. He said, we need lots of money because, you know, we've still got the bad stats. Well, you know, logic says you've got lots of money, it's not working. It's because you guys are getting it all. Willie Jackson says, he's not getting it. Well, he drives his kid to school in an SUV to King's College, lives in David Longie's old house. He's getting plenty.
An American SUV. He's got a Dodge, one of the brand new ones, like maybe a couple of years old.
Yeah, so is Tamahiri. I mean, no reason. That's fine. But, you know, organisations have leaders and they have to be paid. But, you know, it's fairly clear the money isn't trickling down to where it's supposed to be. It's none of our business anyway. It's been given to them. They can do what they like. But don't come back for more. Don't say... you know, you want a Maori TV channel? Fine, fund it. You've got $42 billion. Don't come to us, don't come to the wider public for more money after all of this, most of it ill-gotten in the first place, for dubious reasons, but you've got it, so use it. And use it, you know, you've got people like old Bob Mahuta used to say, the state's still got to pay the welfare, despite the fact that, you know, it was a large proportion of welfare was going to the Maori, but why shouldn't the $42 billion help to pay it, since Maori seem to be so fond of it? You know, that's the sort of stuff that sticks in the throat, really.
If there's $42 billion, Joe, let's say if these trusts were a non-profit organisation, how much money would that make in terms of difference to local Maori people and perhaps rural areas who are now having a lot of roading funding taken off them and things of this nature under UN Agenda 21 protocols? Rural areas are getting washed out and the Māori out there are basically stranded in poverty. What are these large tribes and organisations doing to help them? And is the Crown, i.e. everybody, paying to compensate people who don't give that money back to their people? How is that working for everybody? How is that advancing Māori when the statistics are only getting worse, Joe?
Well, first off, what Māori are doing is they're turning $1.2 billion worth of treaty settlement, so it's not a lot of money, and if you count all the amount of money that Māori have paid since 1840 in tax, it far exceeds that. So what they're doing is they're not being neoliberal, they're using it for long-term investment. Now, you can't get long-term investment if you're offering welfare to all of your board members. It's illogical economically. So what this argument, the entire basis of this argument is that Māori should not receive treaty settlements based on the fact that it will not filter down to all the members within the trust or within iwi. Well, that's none of the Crown's business. It is absolutely none of the Crown's business.
What if we cut out the middleman? What if it was to go directly to the Pōra Māori to help them, like with a car or paid up rent for a year or something? I mean, but then again, that does have a very good point there, is because as John has said, and I totally agree, Māori business is booming and it's very good at what it does. And a measure in net worth of the Māori economy is not a measure of net profit. I mean, and let's think about, say, the measure of the percentage of the economy in the United States is now 60% financial derivatives and financial speculation. And that's built on nothing but sand. It's not a reflection of the quote unquote real economy. How much of this is all leveraged? In whose name is it done? And who benefits in the meantime from these long-term investments?
If they measure the Maori economy, if it's 40 billion, I think that's roughly 20% of the whole economy. In other words, they've caught up financially. You know, doing well. It is none of our business what tribes do. It's just I feel sorry for the individual members of those tribes who are being shafted once again, as they used to be when they were slaves and so on. They're not getting it. I had a discussion with Mike Moore about this. He was very proud of having introduced the iwi model for compensation. I thought it was a disaster. I thought the money should have gone to the individuals to, you know, let them invest as they wish. But we have the iwi model, and suddenly everybody belongs to an iwi. They didn't before. Suddenly everyone thinks, right, people follow incentives. The incentive was get with the program, get with the iwi, become a member of an iwi. You didn't even know what it was before, but now you found out that if you sign up with Ngāpui or someone, you can get money. So they did. It's created all these neo-Maori, neo-tribes, neo-corporations. It's not real. But nonetheless, it exists. I'm just saying, having gone this far, no more. Rule off. That's it. No more villages. Live the life of ordinary people.
I'd like to respond to that. That this is the same as me saying that Irish people, Scottish, and English are all just British. There's no difference at all between any of those different groups. Iwi are an important part of Māori culture. That's how we identify with what part of Māoridom we are. If we just can't just lump all Māoris into this Māori basket and they're all the same and just get one payment and that's for all of them. And a lot of iwi haven't been paid out. Ngāpui are still to be paid out. You know, some of the most impoverished New Zealanders live in Kaikoui and they haven't had a treaty settlement yet.
What were the grievances? What were the grievances that they're claiming for? I wasn't aware of any wars up in Ngāpui, or there's a lot of intertribal wars, but I'm not even sure what they're supposed to be getting their loot for.
And also, Joe, might I ask as well? You're saying we can't lump all Māori into this thing because all Māori identify with the tribe. And in so doing, you're throwing all Māori in with that. I've known plenty of Māori, only a few that I know are actually even really have any identification with their tribe whatsoever. Many of which have never been on a marae in their life.
Just to clarify, I wasn't meaning that you just give them to people, anyone who's Maori the same amount.
Yeah.
You do it by tribe, identify the tribe, but don't give it to the tribe. Give it to people in the tribe.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
You give it to the tribe or leaders, you get what happens with all big corporations. The leaders, like you look at the African dictatorships and so on, the leaders always take it for themselves.
Similar thing happened when the English compensated people in Canada for their tribes and wealthy elements within them behave very corruptly and basically are driving around in Hummers while the rest of their people are freezing and going hungry. And I believe a similar thing to a large extent is happening here. And is there a methodology of getting equity for Māori tribes members, whether or not they've proven their stuff or not? I mean, shouldn't that be something you can do in school easily? This is like one of your first things you do when you're 10 years old or something like that. In school is that you have to trace your ancestry back to know which tribe you come from and get automatically signed up to your tribe's dividends, for example.
I was on Willie Jackson's show for 2 hours. It was rather similar to this. Joe is sort of on his own here, and I was on my. But just like you're, I think, treating us both fairly. Willie treated me very fairly. He got stuck in, of course. But yeah, good credit to him. But where he was uncomfortable was when I mentioned that, who do you speak for, Willie? How many people do you speak for? How many of your, tribe or whatever actually agree with you or benefit? And that's where the leaders find it very difficult, because they know that it's not many. It's mainly them and their extended families and the corporate people. It's the corporate people. But the ordinary Joe, no pun intended, is not really getting it, and should be. But it's none of our business. It's their business,
Do you think, Joe, that So you agree with us, Joe, that the majority of Māori members of tribes should benefit from settlements and business interests and what have you, and they should be beneficiaries to the trust, and every trust has beneficiaries and trustees. I believe that people like John Tamahere and Willie Jackson have done not only very well for themselves, but also for their tribes in their dutiful running of their daily business and whatnot. Don't you think that's fair?
No, I agree with John on the point that it's none of our business. This is how trusts run. It's up to the trusts how they run, and this is being used as a twisted argument to deny iwi treaty settlements. And
but you're not
John
actually
mentioned
denying
earlier.
iwi. You're denying a certain group of people who've managed to prove that they're iwi and leaving the rest out of the equation entirely.
Are you sure? Well, I don't know that there are. I don't know that there is evidence of that. Is there, Vinny, really?
I'm not sure. I'm asking.
I agree that Joe agrees with me. It is none of our business, and it's not part of my argument anyway as to the fairness of the.
I'm not saying what they should do. I'm just throwing out balls of fire. Like, this was what I would do if it was my mine to give. This is how I'd be equitable to my people and whatnot.
The group that's not being heard is the good, fair-minded Maori who are getting on with their lives. Are intimidated by the leaders. A lot of them write to me, and a lot of them from Australia. They're intimidated. They're too scared. The whites are too scared as well. But the Maori who agree with the likes of me are too scared to stand up on the marae. I don't blame them, and say, you guys don't speak for us. They're very frustrated with them, but they just they're not quite in a position to stake everything and put up with the odium and God knows what else would come down on them. So, I think it's fair. When I make my statements, I'm talking to those Maori people, the ones that I know, who aren't getting heard. And the radicals are in control. They're only a small group. A lot of Maori don't like to be patronised like this.
And if they're representing an organisation and it's this operates in many ways the same ways as a company, companies are entitled to privacy and secrecy and all of those kind of things, so long as they're not breaking the law and getting investigated, right?
Yeah, these are just political groups, and it's the same in our, in our parliament. We entrust our politicians, for better or worse, with doing the work so that we don't have to. And I suppose tribes are no different, and the ordinary people in the tribe have to put up with the decisions made by the leaders. But it's just a shame if that money is not getting down to where it would be sorely appreciated, I suppose. But as I say, Joe, none of my business.
So, Joe, do you agree that most of the money should go to the administrators of the trust and the rest of the tribe? If they don't prove their lineage, they don't deserve any?
No, they everyone who's a member of the iwi should be entitled to part of the treaty settlement, and however they divvy that out. But I'm not aware of the internal functions of how those trusts work. I don't really get involved in that side.
But if you're advocating for treaty settlements and using the growth in the Māori economy to make your points, wouldn't it be prudent to know precisely how those things actually work? To be sure that it's not all smoke and mirrors, so a couple of people can suck up all the wealth for themselves?
No, I don't see if it's any of my business. If the
so it's not any of our business, and it's not any of your business.
Well, all I want to do is I want to see this country get right, and I want to see the treaty settlement process to be fair and to be full. However, that's divided once it's with the trust. That's none of my business. That's how the iwi need to decide on that.
So, if it needs to be fair and it needs to be full, but the iwi by themselves decide on it and they decide to keep it for themselves, is that fair? Is that full?
what you're getting at is that the Crown shouldn't be giving out treaty settlements.
No, Joe. That's the direct opposite. I think that compensations should be made, and I believe that a framework has already been laid out to give a certain amount of money. What I'm wondering is, how exactly are these iwi planning to do with it, and are they going to be transparent about it so that they can be held accountable just as the Crown should be held accountable?
Well, I've seen their people, aren't they? Their people, not to us. They're accountable to their people. That's what Joe would probably say, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I agree with John, yeah.
So who of your people is trying to hold the iwi to account for financial management and what have you?
I believe it's the Māori Land Courts.
So they have a regulatory authority over the governance of the trust. They can look into them, investigate them. There's no secrecy from them, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think so. The Serious Fraud Office gets involved. I think it's the Māori Land Court that governs there. And if you have an issue with your iwi or the trust within the iwi, you can approach the Māori Land Court.
Well, that sounds very similar to the way the Police Complaints Authority works. It's all staffed by police, and many of the complaints don't get held up.
Vinny, may I...
But that's pure speculation on my part. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
I think it is speculation. I've got a slide to bring up here. Full and fair, but also final. Now, I've got a slide here, if you can see it. Tell me if you can.
Pull it back.
I think you'll find...
Basically, just hold it in front of your face, mate. Oh, wait, here we go. A little bit up further. What does it say? Final settlement of the Ngāi Tahu title.
Yeah, 1944, I think it says. Now, this is the sort of thing that I object to, this re-litigation all the time. Ngāi Tahu have had 5 full and final settlements. Tainui have had 4. You know, I fronted Chris Finlayson at Orewa, of all places, Orewa. Because of the significance of Orewa, I thought I'd go along to a meeting he was having of the National Party. And he said, I said, it won't be final though, will it, Chris? They'll be coming back for more. It's all the Māori people say that. You can't bind one generation. You can only bind one generation. So they'll be back for more. And he said, no. If these aren't final, I'm Rumpelstiltskin. Well, I think he is. What people want to know is that this $2 or $3 billion, whatever it is, for whatever reason, that is a fact, and when Ngāpuia paid off and a few others, that'll be that. That it is that. That they're not going to be coming back and saying, we were just kidding, it wasn't really full and final. We've now got a whole lot of other reasons why we need more hundreds of millions of dollars. That's what people want to know, and that should be put in stone somehow or other. It didn't work in this case, because there's an Act of Parliament, you know, for the full and final settlement of Ngāi Tahu in 1944. It's an ongoing thing. It's a scam as far as I'm concerned, and people need to see the end of it. They'll say, right, our consciences are now clear. I mean, I haven't got anything on mine, but a lot of people seem to think that the compensation was richly deserved, but there's got to be an end. And that's what needs to go through Parliament or something, or they need to take away the Maori seats or the means to extort more, because it is extortion. And you know, we now should go forward as a racially neutral country where race doesn't enter into it. It's all about the human race, and all of that past grievance can be set aside, and we all go together. I feel for the patronised Maori, really, and I'm actually hoping that as a result of my efforts, those people might feel more like equal New Zealanders than they do now, where they feel like patronised New Zealanders, and the only way they can become equal people is to go to Australia.
That document that John's just shown was in 1944, and I believe it was in the order of approximately £25,000 to £50,000. So this was to Ngāi Tahu. What this treaty settlement was, full and final, was for the entire South Island. Now this is a landmass that is the size of England and Wales combined. And at the time in 1944, Māori were second-class citizens. So what this is it's the bare minimum amount of treaty settlement. And in 1944, for that amount of money, you could buy one Lancaster bomber. So to get the amount for one Lancaster bomber for a huge landmass is unrealistic. And so with treaty settlements, they need to be fair and full, not as quick and final as Auntie Helen would prefer, but they have to be fair and full so we can put this issue to bed for the remainder of this nation's history. So currently, treaty settlements are only 2% value of the original land, of the original estates that were promised in the Treaty of Waitangi would be undisturbed. So if we manage to get this right, and we give a fair and a full treaty settlement, then we'll be able to put this to bed.
But the statistics of Māori will continue as usual, because it doesn't matter how much compensation has been given out so far, it doesn't make the statistics any better. To me, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't give them the money. It means that there should be some kind of accountability for where the money goes and who in the tribe it benefits, perhaps. I don't know, but it's their business to sort out, as was stated.
Can I possibly shed some light on these numbers? Because I'm reading the document here. Joe is 600 to 1,200% out by my dodgy maths. It says here, payment of £300,000 in settlement of Ngāi Tahu claim, whereas the persons now interested in the claims have agreed to accept the payment of the sum of £300,000. Now that was an absolute fortune in 1944, considering there were only 2,000 Ngāi Tahu in the South Island in 1940. That's not a bad return. 300,000, which must be many millions today. I'm not sure what factor you inflate that by. The point was they agreed, and when they agree, they're not entitled to come back, are they? And they came back, I think, in 1969 and got some more, and then, of course, later on in the 90s. So that's why I say, when will it end? I'm not so concerned with who gets it in the tribe. That's between their leaders and them, and they're entitled to militate if they want to. Like in all parties and organisations, but the issue is how many more times can they come back for more money? Because it's become an issue of money over mana, and there's no mana in taking other people's money. Even the $5 billion, you can't say that the $5 billion was gained by their own efforts. This is the thing, a lot of Maori seem to believe that sitting around living on rents on inherited land is the only way to make a living, and if they haven't got land, they can't make a living, and they must find ways to get more and more of the terrible white man's money, and they've got to drop that idea. A lot of Maori are much better than that, and they're living very good lives and running successful businesses. The biggest business in the town that I'm sitting in at the moment, where I live, is owned by a Maori. It's a trucking company. He's doing very well. So it's bad for people to think that the only way they can get money is to export it from others. Rightly or wrongly, it's got to stop.
Joe, do you believe that the trust should be able to litigate infinitely against the Crown forever and get compensation every single time?
Well, I honestly believe that we have to get it right the first time and stop giving out piddly little amounts of money, like $300,000 for
Pounds,
a
Joe.
piece of... If you let me speak, well, £300,000 for a landmass the size of England and Wales. If I was to go and take £300,000 over to the UK and say, "Oh, could I please have England and Wales?" they'd laugh at me. And that's ridiculous. You can't buy a big landmass the size of the South Island for that ridiculous amount of money. And if you do feel uncomfortable with giving iwi money, then just return the land. That's perfectly fine. Iwi will be very comfortable with that. It's said in the Treaty of Waitangi that it would be undisturbed estates. This is the key word here: undisturbed estates, not confiscated. It's undisturbed.
But you're not suggesting that the entire. But you're not suggesting the entirety of the South Island and everybody's current property on it should be given back to the ownership of Ngāi Tahu.
Well, hold on. The statistics that John has got of Māori only being 2,000 people are vast inaccuracies. Hobson described that when he first came to New Zealand, there wasn't a part of it that was not inhabited by Māori. And Ngāi Tahu had managed to populate, even in Cook's travels, they had all of Banks Peninsula, there were parasites up there. Even when HMS Resolution was in Fiordland, there was Māori living in Fiordland National Park. Well, no one lives there now, but every single part of the South Island had been colonised by Māori. Now, if the Māori population in the South Island was decimated because of European disease being introduced, and also from Māori being excluded from the public health system, well, how's that the fault of Ngāi Tahu?
You've got to state facts, though, Joe. You see, even Steve O'Regan, so-called Tippany for certain circumstances, when you argue with him about the 2,000, he says, no, that's outrageous. There were 7,000. Okay, 7,000 then. That's not many, is it, for the whole South Island? They weren't using most of it. They were in little family groups. Yes, there were some in Banks Peninsula. There were some on Fovo Strait there. They were in little family groups dotted about the place. They didn't use the middle of the island. They didn't go there. They weren't entitled to it. They weren't using it. We've got to talk, we're just coming from different moral bases here. And if we're not coming from truth, it's a bit pointless having a discussion. If Steve O'Regan says there were 7,000, I'm inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt, even though I've also seen that there were 2,000. But it's not many. And it's not worth paying somebody for the entire island. Billy Jackson would have you believe that they should be, the real figure should be sort of 70 billion or 30 billion, I think. Today's value. What a bloody cheek. Today's value improved by the Pākehā, the evil colonists, largely by the efforts of the people who were not Maori. That's why it's worth 30 billion today. You talk about Auckland. Well, Auckland, of course, is worth a fortune today. But when Hobson first went there, there was just a bunch of volcanic cones, largely empty because of Maori raids of one sort or another. The South Island was largely empty because of Te Rapraha. Yeah, so
Well, it seems.
From one side.
Can I just say? I seem to think of a parallel here. I don't know if you've seen the film The Social Network about the founder of Facebook, and it wasn't entirely Mark Zuckerberg's own idea. He developed it, he worked it, and he made it happen, and he came up with all the programming and everything, but he didn't come up with the idea. And so they paid handsomely the two twin rowers for coming up with the idea, but it wasn't anywhere near what Facebook at the time was worth. Now, if you're just sitting there and you happen to be there, let's talk about compensation. Somebody's been wronged, they need to be compensated. I was wronged once when I was in Dunedin. I had $5,000 worth of equipment and change and stuff stolen from me by a flatmate who skipped out and crossed his name out on the lease. Okay? The police caught him and they awarded me compensation of $75. I didn't think that was fair, but I can't go and infinitely prosecute him for doing that to me until I get the full amount back. It's not going to happen. I had to let it go and make what I could from what I had, and I haven't done too bad a job at it. Could that be done?
Well, first off, Vinny, am I able to address
Oh, sure.
John's assessment on the population of Māori in the South Island.
Steve O'Regan's assessment, yeah.
Well, first off, Te Rapraha is probably one of the greatest New Zealanders that has contributed to our national heritage than any other New Zealander, because he invented the All Black haka. And this is one of the proudest ceremonies that the New Zealand All Blacks do before they play any game, and I would say that's one of the reasons why they win a lot of their rugby games, or the majority of them. They've won more games than any other professional rugby team. But what John likes to portray Te Rapraha as is some vicious savage that went on an ethnic cleansing trip around the South Island, when I've actually read about Te Rapraha, and it's not true at all. He was actually very forgiving to his enemies, and when he attacked parasites down in Canterbury, he would actually get the lieutenants of the defeated iwi, and he would make them his own lieutenants. And Te Rapraha was Māoridom's greatest empire builder. He ruled an area from Christchurch all the way up to Whanganui, with an H, John. That's with an H, yeah.
Yeah, pronounced Whanganui, yeah. But what's that got to do with what we were talking about? He still ethnically cleansed the South Island, didn't he? I mean, he still ripped open a pregnant woman and roasted a fetus on a stick. I mean, that's the sort of stuff he was up to. What did he do about the people he captured and took back to Kapiti Island? I think he tortured them by a red-hot poker. Look, it's not as though my culture is lily white in that area. You know, the hanging, drawing, and quartering of prisoners and burning of witches. But nonetheless, his son, who was a fine man apparently, Tamihana, was it? Look, I can't remember. Tamihana Te Rapraha, I think, went on a tour around the South Island also, apologising for the sins of his father. So that gives you an idea of what he was up to, what Te Rapraha was up to. But we were talking about the population of the South Island, and, it wasn't many, was it? At £300,000 was $600,000, multiplied by whatever the inflation was between 1944 and now, was quite a lot of money. And the point is, really, that they accepted it. But being basically dishonest, they came back for more years later because they could get it. I'm not saying that good luck to them. You know, they were given it. They were given $170 million, which is now $5 billion. And,
John, are you saying that everybody in the tribe is corrupt and dishonest, or just the ones who got the money and did all the litigation?
I probably went too far. I see a lot of dishonesty among the Maori leaders, so I'm not actually saying that they were just opportunists. They saw an opportunity and they went for it. They misrepresented the history, the populations, and all the rest of it. Maori aren't the only people that do that in court cases. My real beef is with the governments that gave it to them.
Gentlemen, if I may, I feel that there's a problem in this country and a problem around the entire world, and this problem is scumbaggery. And scumbaggery knows no borders, it knows no race, it knows no colour, it knows no creed. It knows only the desire for power and control.
Well, it's incentives. People respond to incentives, don't they?
Do you think, Joe, that there might be... I mean, are you even prepared to accept the possibility that there might be some scumbaggery going on involved here in the treaty process, and some people doing it for their own gain and not for the greater good of their people?
Yeah, I think what there is I think there's some scumbaggery going on in these alternate histories that John's talking about, and the fact that the diaries of Her Majesty's Bark Endeavour describe that Māori were living in every single part of the South Island. And so I've seen a couple of these radical books that say that the Ngāi Tahu people were there's only about 5 of them living in the South Island. They're just inconsistent with the records of Her Majesty's Bark Endeavour that Captain Cook recorded. He recorded many Māori. they even attacked him in near Nelson or Queen Charlotte Sound. So
did Captain Cook go
1769.
inland the South Island and explore the whole place, or I thought he was like a sailor. He navigated around it.
Of course he didn't.
No.
And that was 1769. That was pre-Te Rauparaha.
So they couldn't have known if there were people living all over the South Island because they hadn't looked.
They were around the edges in little family groups, and that made a total of 7,000. There would have been a lot of different areas. It's well documented. I mean, even Steve O'Regan knows it.
Te Rauparaha is actually a very great New Zealander, and he's got a stadium named after him.
I know, because of the sycophantic Pororua City Council. I think it's outrageous. But, you know, that's what they did. Nobody complained except me, because they've got these sort of carvings outside with great erect phalluses on, which the kids have to go past on the way to their swimming lessons.
And let's not forget, Saddam Hussein also had a statue of himself.
Well, not in that condition, I don't think.
But my point is, just because somebody's revered by some, it doesn't mean that they're a saint or completely without wrongdoing in any sense of the word.
Well, I'd like to go into that. You know, if we're going to be talking about genocidal maniacs, there's actually I'd like to explain Oliver Cromwell, who was responsible for 618 deaths of pregnant babies and unborn babies and women, and he killed approximately 40% of the population of Ireland, and they've named a township after him in Otago called Cromwell. So I think, you know, what we should really be looking at is renaming Cromwell to Te Rauparaha, because we don't want to endorse genocidal maniacs. We want to endorse people who contribute to our national culture, like Te Rauparaha, who've given the All Blacks the haka.
Right. Well said. Yes, that man. I mean, I'm not sticking up for Cromwell. I'll take you at your word on that one. A lot of bad people have had things named after them and so on.
Other than
not
that,
sure that inventing a cannibal dance actually qualifies you for greatness, but he certainly was paramount chief in his day, and there's no denying that. Hongi Hika was another one. Massacred an awful lot of people, but he prevailed, and that's what it was all about. It was might is right, and they were right because they were mighty.
All right, gentlemen. I think that that's all she wrote, more or less, for tonight. It's now time for the closing statements. Joe, would you like to go first?
Yeah. Well, I put it to you, Mr. Ansell, to get your people to confront their racism and to stop turning Māori against Pākehā and Pākehā against Māori. And this is One Law for All, NZCPR, Treatygate, and all these different hate groups to stop this war on the people of New Zealand. And instead of singling them out as being privileged, and all we're doing here at Mana is just trying to fight for Indigenous rights, the same as what the United Nations are trying to fight for. And we've had to, as Māori people, we've had to fight for everything we've ever received from the state, from Māori television to treaty settlements to even our own language being legal in our own land. And please stop pretending anything awarded to Māori is an attack on mainstream Pākehā. Thank you, Mr. Ansell. I put it to you that.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, and John, your final statements?
All right. There are cases of racism in this country. I'm appalled that as recently as the 1960s, there were people advertising for flats saying no dogs, no Maoris. This is inconceivable today. But we've grown up. We have come past that. The most despicable cases of racism by my people, my race, if you like, were those inflicted on the Chinese in the late 19th century, early 20th century, the vicious racism right up to the state level, poll taxes and so on. I contrast those two people. I married one of the Chinese people, so I have some knowledge of their attitude, the attitude difference between Maori and Chinese. The Chinese way of dealing with that appalling racism was to put their heads down and work hard, knowing they weren't going to get any money, and beat the white man at his own game, if you like. They may not have thought of it like that, but that's what they've done, and I think we all admire that. Maori are obsessed with looking backwards, looking for ways to make money, looking for ways to coin it at the expense of the evil coloniser who they show no gratitude to for whatsoever. That's what gets in my throat, really. No gratitude at all for the major enhancements that they've had. You know, it's about being fair. It's there's nothing that I have ever said anywhere on the internet that is actually racist, because I'm not. There is a vast difference between criticism and racism. I ask you to think about that next time you want to label me. I am critical when I see unfairness from whichever place it comes, and I see unfairness in this area, and I'm going to talk about it. And I'm going to keep talking about it for as long as I can, or as long as I'm asked. If I can be shown that the facts that I've found are not true, I'll be the first to say so. I've said so on one or two occasions. There is no plot. Treatygate is just me. That's all I speak for. If people want to agree with me, then, you know, I guess I speak for them too, but there's no compulsion. And these other groups, they're not making money out of it, as far as I know. I'm certainly not. And we're only doing it because we care about sticking up for our people too. By our people, I include my forebears and the rest of New Zealand, who aren't really getting much of a hearing when the whole state seems to be siding with the whole sort of treaty process. Mm-hmm. So I just hope, Joe, that you can see where I'm coming from and realise, even though you don't agree with me, that I'm not a nasty person. My motives are pure by my own lights,
and you certainly haven't gained anything by it, bro.
I hope we can agree to disagree. Like Willie Jackson and I, we got a photograph of our arms around each other. I've put a caption to it which says racist in the middle, and it's pointing to both of us. We both think each other is a racist, and that's okay by me. You and I probably think each other is a racist, but hopefully we can celebrate each other's humanity.
Yeah, I think there's a good one. Oh, gentlemen, it's been a mission, you know, and I think this needed to happen so that even if the three of us maybe can't agree, I mean, in fact, come to think of it, in this last segment, I realised I had very different opinions to both of you. I think that this kind of really needed to happen. This discussion needed to be a little bit more open than it previously has been. And I think it is central to this so-called idea of democracy, which in the Latin means mob rule. I don't like that kind of thing. It's essential to the idea of fairness and transparency and freedom in and of itself, specifically to listen to the people you don't agree with, listen to the people you think are crazy, and consider what they're talking about without dismissing everything offhand, without looking into it in its entirety and making our mind up one way or the other without that investigation. And I think everybody who has listened to this can now say that you have now a large amount of facts and evidence displayed by both sides, and you will have to use your discernment and your ability to confirm facts and evidence for yourself in order to figure out who is telling the truth and how New Zealand can progress as a whole with one race, the human race. Whether that be everybody has all their individual liberties, or whether that be we can tolerate the scumbaggery in this country, whether it be from our politicians, community leaders, or anything. I will not tolerate scumbaggery in my country, regardless of who benefits from said scumbaggery, even if it's me. Thank you very much for listening, ladies and gentlemen. And also, be reminded, this is a listener-supported broadcast, so you can go to thevinnieeastwoodshow.com and make a donation today, or set up a regular monthly gift amount going into the PayPal or the Kiwi Bank accounts there. And we have a number of wee sponsors on the website as well, including a number of books, How to Raise Crowdfunding Capital by Kevin Lawton, and The Range of Illusion by B. Holmes. Thank you very much for listening, ladies and gentlemen. And you stay classy, San Diego.